Hey guys, tonight you find yourself beneath a town wall of old grey stone, where the last of the evening light clings to the battlements like thin butter spread over coarse bread, and the river mist creeps low across the road to soak your boots before you have even properly begun. The gate ahead rises from the dusk with a sort of patient gloom, all iron straps and oak boards, its hinges black with age, its murder holes dark as missing teeth. And above it a lantern sways in the wind as if already tired of its duties. Smoke drifts from chimneys within the walls and hangs beneath the cold air, mixing with the smell of horse sweat, damp straw, wet wool, fish scales from the quay, and the sharp tang of torch pitch. Somewhere deeper in the town, bells are ringing for the evening office, and the sound comes out over the rooftops in slow bronze waves, solemn enough to stir the soul and sleepy enough to make your shoulders sink an inch lower. Medieval travel brochures really oversold this experience. You stand in mud thick as pottage, clutching the little bundle that holds your bread, gloves, and one rather doubtful strip of smoked eel, and you look up at the wall and realize, with admirable honesty, that you probably would not last a week out here. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you settle in, comment your location and local time, so this old road can feel a little less lonely. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The guard at the gate notices you only after a fair and dignified pause, which is to say after he's finished picking at a bit of salt trapped in his beard. He leans on a spear polished smooth where many hands have gripped it before his, and in the lantern glow you see that his eyes are red from smoke and tiredness rather than menace. He wears a wool tunic under a quilted jack, with a fur-lined cloak thrown back off one shoulder, and at his belt hang an iron key, a horn cup, and a knife whose handle shines from long use. He looks at you, at the road, at the darkening fields behind you, and then back at you again as though hoping you may yet turn into someone more exciting. "You're the new night man," he says at last. You nod, because this much is unfortunately true. He grunts, which in towns like this can mean welcome, pity, or indigestion. Then he jerks his chin toward the open gate. Come on, then. Curfew soon. You pass beneath the arch where the stone breathes out the day's cold, and your footsteps change from sucking mud to a hollow clop on worn paving. Above you hangs the great portcullis, its teeth suspended by chain and winch, ready to fall if the town must clench itself shut. The wooden gates stand open for now, though not wide, and beyond them the street bends inward between leaning houses whose upper floors nearly seem to whisper across the lane. Rushes have been scattered over thresholds. A woman in a blue wool veil is drawing in her last basket of onions. Two boys hurry past with a bucket of ale slopping against their knees. From an upper window someone empties a bowl of dishwater into the gutter with excellent timing and no concern for your dignity. The guard leads you to a little chamber built into the gatehouse wall, and there the day watch is changing over. One man rubs his feet near a brazier and mutters about a merchant who tried to dodge the market toll by claiming his pack mule was full of holy books. Another is binding up a blister with goose fat and a scrap of linen. A third, older and broad in the shoulder, stands beside a peg where staffs and cudgels are kept. And he eyes you with the same expression a carpenter might give to a board that may or may not split when nailed. This, you learn quickly, is Hamo, the reeve of the gate for the week, a man entrusted with the practical holiness of latches, hinges, counts, and complaints. He has a face like a weathered chest lid and fingers blackened by lamp soot. When he speaks, It is in the calm tone of someone who has spent many years explaining the same simple truths to men who insist on being tired and foolish. He hands you a watchman's staff, thick ash wood bound with an iron ring near the tip. It is heavier than you expect. Of course it is. Everything medieval that looks simple turns out to weigh as much as regret. You walk the inner gate road till the bell, Hamo says, then the fish lane, the market square, chapel yard, storehouses, and back, slow, not lazy. Eyes open, no sleeping in porches, no dicing in alehouses, no leaving your post to chase every story told by washerwomen or drunkards. Even if the story sounds convincing, you ask, especially then. There's a low chuckle from the man with the blister. You're already making friends in the way mildew makes friends with stone. Hamo continues. You challenge strangers after curfew. You mind the lanterns at the gate. If there is fire, you raise the bell. If there is blood, you fetch help before you fetch cleverness. If there is a pig loose in the square again, you do not run. Let it shame itself. This last instruction seems too specific to be imaginary. On the bench beside the brazier rests a chain of keys heavy enough to anchor a small boat. Hemo lifts them with both hands and lets them settle into his palm with a deep iron clink. For a moment the room grows solemn. Keys matter in a town. Keys are trust made visible. They mean granaries, toll chests, side doors, shutters, and the line between sleeping safely and waking to disaster. Some swear that iron itself keeps away ill luck, and many folk touch a key for luck much as they touch a saint's badge or a relic case, though no one can quite agree whether the blessing belongs to the metal, the lock, or the hand that turns it. You're not given the whole ring, thankfully. Hamo selects 2 long keys and 1 smaller hook-ended piece of iron, then hangs them from your belt. They drag at your hip like tiny jailers. Postern, lantern chest, storeyard wicket, nothing else. You nod again, beginning to suspect that most medieval employment is simply nodding while cold people burden you with responsibilities. Outside, dusk deepens by the breath. The gates are pulled inward a little more, and men with carts hurry to enter before curfew makes the road their problem alone. A tanner passes with a wagon smelling so fierce you nearly achieve sainthood on the spot. A pilgrim woman comes limping through with a shell badge sewn to her cloak and a bundle of herbs hanging from her wrist. She gives the gate arch a quick touch with 2 fingers as she enters, then touches her forehead. A habit, perhaps, a charm. In towns and on roads, people make these little bargains with the unseen all the time. Tie red thread against fever, keep rowan wood near the door, hang a wolf tooth in the stable, turn a loaf upside down by mistake, and some will mutter that sorrow has been invited to supper. The first stars appear above the wall walk, then the curfew bell sounds. It does not ring in haste, it rolls, 1 deep note, then another, each one spreading through the town like a hand pressing blankets over restless children. Shutters close, voices shorten. Somewhere a dog barks and is answered by another farther off. The gate guards swing the oak leaves inward until only a narrow passage remains for late arrivals, with urgent business and good excuses. The iron chains groan. A torch sputters. The night begins not with drama, but with the quiet tightening of many ordinary habits. You take your first steps along the inner side of the wall, staff in hand, cloak tucked close, feeling the stones radiate a damp chill through the soles of your boots. To your left, the lane runs toward the river quarter, where ropes, barrels, and fish baskets lie stacked in shadow. To your right rise houses with soot-black rafters and little leaded windows glimmering like sleepy eyes. A girl kneels at a doorstep gathering rushes before they turn to slime underfoot. An old man draws a bolt across his ale cellar and spits into the gutter, then glances at you with mild relief, as though your mere existence might discourage chaos for an hour or two. And perhaps it might. This is the curious thing that settles over you as the bell fades and the town folds itself inward. No one expects glory from the night guard. No bard waits nearby to praise your excellent pacing. No lord leans from a tower to commend the angle of your lantern. You're here for smaller victories. A door checked, a quarrel cooled, a suspicious sound noticed, a fire caught before it climbs the beams. In daylight, people boast of walls and charters and saints' protection. By night, it turns out they also trust a tired soul with cold hands and a stick. The thought warms you more than the cloak does. You walk on, deeper into the blue dark, while above the roofs the last light thins to ash, and the bells leave only their memory in the air. You walk on while the curfew bell's last tremor still seems to hover inside the stone, and the gatehouse behind you settles into its own heavy breathing of chain, hinge, ember, and muttered voices. The staff in your hand has already found a rhythm against the paving, a slow knock that says less heroically than one might hope still awake, still here, still slightly colder than is reasonable. The street bends back toward the gate passage, where Hamo waits beneath a bracket lantern with the expression of a man who has not yet decided whether you are useful, harmless, or likely to mislay municipal property before midnight. "Come," he says, and turns without flourish. You follow him beneath the inner arch of the gatehouse, into that dim machinery of town life where security is made of ordinary things, beams, bolts, ropes, iron, and habits old enough to feel sacred. The lantern light moves across oak doors banded in black metal, across rough walls sweating with old damp, across pegs where cloaks drip and tools hang. Somewhere overhead, on the wall walk, a man coughs into the wind. Somewhere below, in a chamber half cut into the thickness of the wall, a brazier clicks and settles as though it too has decided to endure the night rather than enjoy it. Hamo leads you first to the winch room. The great spindle for the portcullis sits there like some squat wooden beast with the chain wound round its middle, each link as thick as 2 fingers. Beside it hang 2 iron hooks, a mallet, and a leather glove missing most of its dignity. The reeve touches the winch with the back of his hand, not lovingly, exactly, but with the sober regard one gives a creature capable of embarrassing everyone if neglected. "If alarm comes," he says, "you fetch me or the senior watch before anyone plays soldier with this. Lower too soon, and you trap townsfolk outside. Lower too late, and you may as well invite trouble in for supper." You nod. There is a lesson here, and it is one the whole medieval world seems to repeat in different forms. Everything important is heavy, awkward, and best not mishandled after dark. From there he takes you through a narrow passage where the ceiling dips low enough to make you bow whether or not you feel reverent. At the end stands a door so swollen by seasons of wet and frost that Hamo must set his shoulder against it. It opens with a sound like an old ox giving up an argument. Inside is the lantern chest, though chest hardly does justice to it. It is a whole cupboard of thick oak, iron-hasped and ash-streaked, built into the wall. On its shelves rest horn lanterns, spare wicks, clay pots of rendered tallow, twists of tow for kindling, and a little sack of beeswax candles reserved. Hamo tells you, for places where respect is due, and tallow smells too much like a butcher's back room. One of the candles is lit just long enough for him to inspect the stock. Its flame is cleaner than the others, steadier, and the faint scent of honey rises through the stale draught. Beeswax belongs to chapels, to better halls, to the bedsides of the rich and the dying. Tallow belongs to everyone else, which is to say to smoke, drips, sputters, and the constant modest hope that darkness will remain negotiable. You watch the gate lanterns, Hamo says. If one gutters, you trim it. If one dies, you relight it. If both die, people notice, and then they complain as if you personally swallowed the moon. That seems unfair. So does rain in lambing season. Still happens. He hands you the small hook-ended iron key for the chest, and you try to look like the sort of person who has always deserved access to municipal flame. The key is cold enough to sting your palm. You slip it back at your belt beside the others, where it knocks gently against the ring of your staff with every step. A thin iron music that will probably accompany your dreams by morning. The next chamber holds the handbell. It hangs from a wall peg wrapped in cloth, its bronze mouth dulled green in places, its handle polished by generations of urgent hands. Hamo takes it down and gives it one quiet test shake. The note is not loud in the small room, but it is pure, serious, and somehow more intimate than the church bells outside. A town bell commands, a handbell warns. One gathers people into order, the other tells them order may be slipping. For fire in a lane, for breach at a gate, for riot if it comes to that, Hamo says. Not for every drunken embrace mistaken for murder. You have had that happen. You will have that happen. He hangs the bell back on its peg. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether bells drive away wicked spirits or merely remind frightened people that they are not alone. But either way, few sounds carry more authority through sleeping streets. Even a child hears a bell differently after dark. It is no longer part of the town's breathing. It is the town clearing its throat. You pass next through the counting nook by the gate, where toll chalk marks still ghost a board from the day's trade. 2 eels, 3 sacks of barley, 1 cart of wool, 6 bundles of rushes, a cask of herring, lamp oil, smoked fish, apples from upriver, and 1 mule so ill-tempered, according to the guard now scraping mud from his boot, that it should have been charged as a second merchant. The place smells of ink, damp leather, and old coin. A goose quill lies in a horn cup beside a lump of sand used to dry wet writing. You think of the scribes who will come at dawn with stained fingers and stiff backs to argue over tallies no one will later remember accurately. Hamo taps the board. You're not a clerk. Praise God. Still, notice what passes in and out. A guard who sees nothing useful is only a scarecrow with opinions. He leads you up a stair so narrow your shoulder brushes the wall. At the top, the wind meets you at once, clean and sharp after the enclosed smoke below. The wall walk stretches in both directions, its planks dark with dew, its parapet rough beneath your glove. Below one side lies the road you came in on, already softening into dark field and mist. Below the other lie the town roofs, a patchwork of shingles, thatch, little chimney tongues of smoke, and the occasional sliver of candlelight leaking around a shutter. Somewhere a baby wails, somewhere someone laughs too long over the last cup, somewhere a horse stamps in a stable and blows steam into straw. Hamo points with 2 thick fingers. Lantern at the north angle, watchfire by the ditch. Call to the other post each quarter of the bell. If you hear no answer, you listen again. Wind steals words and gives back foolishness. As if summoned, a voice comes thin across the dark from farther along the wall. All well, Hamo cups his hands and answers. Well enough. It seems to satisfy everyone involved. The town below has not gone silent after all. It has only changed register. Daytime clatter has become nighttime murmur, a shutter bar set in place, a bucket drawn up, a prayer muttered, a spoon against a bowl. the rustle of rushes being turned with a foot before sleep. In some houses people still eat their late pottage from trenchers gone soft with broth. In others they rub goose grease into cracked hands or pin little charms above bed curtains to keep away fever dreams. Some swear that sleeping with a knife beneath the mattress wards off witches. Some say a sprig of rue tied with the red thread does better. Even now, it is hard to tell whether such habits are faith, fear, or simply the human desire to feel less helpless when the night presses close. When you descend again, Hamo takes you through the postern passage, a smaller sideway in the wall used for discreet comings and goings, messengers, and the sort of business town authorities prefer not to discuss loudly. The key for it is long and elegant in a grim sort of way, with wards cut like little teeth. He places it in the lock, turns it, and the bolt withdraws with a deep metal groan that you feel up your arm. "This one you open for no cheerful stranger," he says. "Not for a merchant delayed at dice, not for a sweetheart who forgot the hour, not for any man who claims the reeve knows him unless he can also say which reeve and why. A useful standard. It keeps out many inventive liars." He shuts the door again and sets your hand to the key so you can feel its weight, its resistance, the exact turn needed. There is something almost priestly in this. You think, not holy, perhaps, but ceremonial. A town survives by countless small rites, locking, counting, circling, calling, answering. One man lights the lantern, another checks the bolt, another hears the bell, another walks the lane. No feast song celebrates them, yet without them the ovens cool, the shutters splinter, and everyone wakes regretfully earlier than planned. At last Hamo stops in the main gate passage once more. The lantern above throws a warm smear of light over his lined face and the drifting breath of the two men on post. He studies you for a moment, perhaps deciding whether enough instruction has reached your head to keep inconvenience from multiplying. "The bell marks the hours," he says. "The keys keep the doors. The rounds keep your senses. Do not hurry the night. It is longer than your impatience." With that he turns away to inspect the chain by the gate leaf, leaving you with your staff, your keys, your lantern duty, and the particular silence that follows being entrusted with just enough authority to make mistakes memorable. You step out once more into the lane. Behind you are the bell, the chest, the postern, the oak doors, the iron locks, and the reeve with his soot-black fingers. Ahead lies the dark curve of the town, waiting to be measured by your footsteps. You step away from the gatehouse with the keys pulling at your belt and the sound of Hamo's last word still sitting somewhere in your mind like a stone dropped into a pond. Do not hurry the night. It is excellent advice, though not especially comforting when the night appears determined to stretch itself over every roof, lane, puddle, and chimney in Christendom. The town has settled under curfew now, not into silence exactly, but into a quieter sort of life, as though all the daylight noise has gone indoors and put on slippers. The lane before you narrows between timbered houses whose upper stories lean so close together that they nearly seem to exchange secrets above your head. Here and there a slit of candlelight shows at a shutter edge, and the paving stones underfoot are slick with old rain, kitchen wash, and whatever else people prefer not to discuss in detail. The gutters along the sides carry a slow, dark trickle toward the river, and the smell is a complicated sermon on how human beings persist in living close together despite considerable evidence against the idea. You tap your staff once against the stones and begin your round in earnest. From the fish lane comes a smell so direct and unwavering that it nearly announces itself before the place does. Barrels stand in rows outside the shuttered sheds, their hoops damp, their wood salt stained. their contents somewhere between tomorrow's supper and yesterday's regret. Nets hang from pegs like sleeping ghosts. A stack of wicker fish baskets leans against a wall, and beside them lies a coil of rope beaded with mist. The river itself is hidden in the dark beyond the quay, but you can hear it shifting softly against pilings, along with the occasional clink of boat tackle and the slap of water against hulls. Somewhere out there a waterbird cries once and then thinks better of it. The fishmongers are supposed to be abed, yet one door still glows faintly at the hinge. You pause, lean close, and hear the unmistakable sound of someone scraping scales from a board, a late worker, then, or a very early one. The town lives by these thresholds of permitted labour, where one person's lateness is another person's necessity. You rap once with the butt of your staff. The scraping stops. A woman's voice calls that she is salting tomorrow's pike and will be done within moments. She sounds neither frightened nor apologetic, merely tired. You believe her. It is strange how quickly a guard learns the music of honest exhaustion. You move on. Beyond the fish lane the street opens a little, and the smells change. Smoke from hearths, ale gone sour on rush-strewn floors, wet wool cloaks steaming faintly where they hang near coals. Somewhere onions frying in fat, somewhere pottage thick with barley, and somewhere smoked herring being warmed enough to remind the whole household of its existence. A narrow stable yard gives off the heavy sweetness of hay, dung, horse breath, leather tack, and damp earth churned under hooves. A mare shifts in her stall and stamps once. Through a crack in the door you glimpse her flank steaming in the cold, in winter, or near enough to it. Even animals seem to dream in clouds. At one threshold an old woman is still scattering fresh rushes across her floor before bolting the door. She uses the toe of her shoe to spread them smooth, adding a pinch of lavender and something sharper you think might be pennyroyal. Some folk say sweet herbs on the floor cleanse more than the smell. Some swear they also discourage sickness, melancholy, fleas, evil spirits, and intrusive relations. Though no one can quite agree whether the herbs truly work or merely make misfortune easier to tolerate. The woman glances up at you, squints, then nods once in approval, as if to say yes. This town remains supervised by a person roughly upright. You return the nod with all the dignity a man can manage while trying not to slip on damp rushes. Further on, the alehouse shutters have finally been drawn, though not tightly enough to keep in the last of the warmth. A stripe of orange light cuts the lane below the door, and through it drifts the smell of stale ale, charred oak, wet boots, and the richer promise of something roasted earlier in the evening and already mostly regretted. You hear voices inside, low and slow now. Not the broad-bellied shouting of market hour, but the after-supper murmur of men reluctant to leave a fire for a bed they suspect will be colder than advertised. A cup knocks against a table. Someone coughs. Someone else laughs once, softly, and then the whole room seems to sag towards sleep. You do not go in. Hamo was quite clear on that point, and besides, there is dangerous comfort in alehouse warmth. One mug, then another. Then you're calling it professional listening while your patrol dissolves around you like butter in porridge. Medieval accountability has a way of arriving precisely when your feet are up. The street leads you next toward the smaller craftsman's quarter, where a cooper's yard lies under a lean-to roof and half-finished barrels stand in ranks like monks doing penance. The smell here is shaved wood, damp sawdust, iron hoops, and old cider. Nearby, a cobbler's bench sits just inside an open front shed, tools laid out with a care that borders on devotionals, waxed thread, scraps of leather, a little pot of grease, and one lonely shoe waiting for a soul. You imagine the cobbler himself asleep upstairs with blackened nails and aching eyes, dreaming perhaps of a world in which feet are less demanding. From a nearby house comes the thin high sound of someone singing to a child. The tune is slow and repetitive, the kind built for rocking rather than performance, and it slips through the shutter cracks into the lane where it mingles with chimney smoke and the faint tinkle of a bridal chain. You slow your pace without meaning to. This is part of the town too, not walls and watches alone, but all the unseen little acts behind wood and cloth and plaster mending, nursing, muttering prayers, folding cloaks by the hearth, banking coals beneath ash so morning will not begin from nothing. Then the song stops, and somewhere above you a chamber pot is emptied with terrible confidence into the gutter, 2 houses ahead. You stop just in time. This, too, is part of the town. You continue with greater caution and a deepened sense of mortality. At the corner by the Tanner's Lane, the air changes so abruptly that it feels like walking into an argument. The smell of curing hides, bark liquor, lime, old flesh, and stagnant water rolls down the passage like a force of nature. You do not need to see the tannery vats to know they are there. Every town keeps some necessary miseries at its edges, and the tannery is one of them, useful beyond measure and fragrant beyond forgiveness. Even the rats seem to move faster here, as if hoping to get through the place before their whiskers absorb too much. A shrine is set into the wall at the lane's mouth, a little image of a saint behind horn panes darkened by soot. Someone has tucked a withered garland beneath it and left a beeswax stub in a niche below. The flame has gone out, but the scent still clings faintly in the cold. People leave offerings at such places for safe travel, recovered children, healthy lambs, healed fevers, forgiven lies, and all the other bargains of ordinary life. Some also leave a bent pin, a thread, or a pebble touched to an aching tooth, hoping the saint may accept the pain by proxy. Whether the saint does, no one can prove. Yet the offerings keep appearing. You pass beneath the shrine and into a lane that slopes gently toward the market square. The houses here are better built, or at least more ambitious. One has carved braces under its upper floor. Another shows painted shutters, now closed. A merchant's sign creaks overhead, its faded lamb and shears swinging slightly in the wind. The square itself is still ahead, but already you can smell it in its sleeping state: trampled straw, cabbage leaves, horse dung, spilled ale, old apples, damp wood, and the faint mineral scent of scales and coin. By day it is noise, bargaining, tolls, bright cloth, gossip, and elbows. By night it feels like a stage after the players have left, props abandoned to moonlight. Before entering the square, you stop at a well and check the cover as Hamo instructed. The chain is secure, the bucket is there. The windlass creaks when you test it. Good. A well left open invites trouble in a town where darkness and clumsiness are on intimate terms. Some swear that spirits linger in deep water after sunset and may call a sleepy person by name. Others say that is nonsense told to stop children wandering. Perhaps both explanations do the same useful work. You glance back toward the gate. It is out of sight now, though the lantern above it still stains the sky a little through the tangle of roofs. Ahead, the deeper streets wait, behind shutters. The town is breathing into sleep, and you, with your cold hands, damp hem, iron keys, an increasingly cautious respect for upper windows, keep walking through it one measured step at a time, learning how curfew does not end life here at all. It only changes the way life sounds when no one is trying to impress the daylight. The market square lies behind you for the moment, still waiting in its moonlit patience, while your feet carry you instead toward the one place in town where curfew never quite manages to close the door on human foolishness. The alehouse sits at the bend of the lane like a warm, stubborn thought, its signboard creaking overhead, its shutters drawn but not sealed, its chimney breathing out a ribbon of smoke thick with oak, grease, and the excellent bad decisions of other people. A little lantern burns in a horn case beside the door, throwing a buttery blur over the threshold. Beneath it, the rushes are flattened by many boots, and the mud there has been trampled into a dark paste with the density of wet bread. You are not meant to linger. Hamo made that plain enough, and the memory of his face rises before you now with all the charm of an unpaid toll. Still, a guard's work is not only walking, it is listening. Listening is the respectable cousin of loitering. So you pause just outside, where the warmth slips through the cracks in the boards and lays one soft hand across your knees. Inside, voices drift in and out around the scrape of stools and the small settling sounds of a late fire. You can hear the landlord moving among cups with the slow, weary confidence of a man who has seen every variety of thirst and trusts none of them. Somewhere near the hearth a dog sighs. Somewhere else a spoon knocks the rim of a bowl in lazy intervals. The smell is thick and layered ale, yeasty and sharp. Onions softened in dripping, damp wool steaming by the embers. A hint of cloves from someone prosperous enough to waste spice on comfort. And under it all the sweet dry perfume of old timber, heated day after day, winter after winter. The door opens a crack before you can decide whether to knock, and the landlord peers out. He's broad in the chest, bald at the crown, and wrapped in an apron that has lost every argument with grease. One eye narrows at you, then he recognizes the staff and relaxes into a face shaped equally by hospitality and suspicion. "You standing out there to arrest my fumes?" he asks. "Only if they resist curfew." He gives a grunt that might be approval. "Come as far as the hearth." "No farther. I'm closing, not hosting a harvest feast." So you step inside just enough to warm your hands at the last embers. The room is low-roofed and smoky, with soot-black rafters overhead and benches polished by generations of cloaks, elbows, and spilled drink. Rushes cover the floor in a patchwork of clean straw and older mysteries. A beeswax candle burns before a little image of St. Julian near the wall, protector of travellers and innkeepers, though judging from the state of the cups, he has also been asked to cover minor accounting sins. Only a few customers remain. A cooper with pink ears and an empty bowl sits nearest the door, staring into the fire as if waiting for it to apologize. Two drovers share the far bench, their boots white with dried road clay, their heads bent together over the final inch of ale in a jug. At the hearth sits an old woman in a brown cloak patched at both shoulders, one hand stretched toward the heat, the other wrapped around a cup she guards like a relic. Her face is lined as folded parchment, her eyes bright in spite of it. The landlord nudges a crust of bread toward you on the end of a knife. Take it before someone more desperate notices. You accept. Because a night guard who refuses free bread is either a saint or a fool, and sainthood tends to be poorly insulated. The crust is hard enough to repair masonry, but warm at the middle, and you chew it slowly while the room resumes its softer muttering around you. This is the work Hamo meant. You begin to see, not drinking, not settling in, but hearing what clings to people once the day has worn them down too far to keep their stories tidy. The cooper speaks first, still not looking away from the fire. Heard there were strangers by the west ditch. "One stranger," says one drover, "a peddler with ribbons and saints' medals. My cousin saw him. Your cousin sees wonders after 2 cups, says the other. Last week he saw the Virgin in a cheese rind. That rind had a holy look. The old woman at the hearth sniffs. The West Ditch has always bred stories. Fog lies there wrong. No one argues with her. In towns like this, age itself is a credential, especially when worn with enough confidence. The landlord wipes a cup with a cloth that only redistributes the problem. What matters is whether he came in by the gate. If Hamo saw him, he is likely a fool, not a threat. That is often the distinction, you say. The old woman turns and gives you a measuring look. You're the new watchman. You nod. Then keep an ear near the chapel lane tonight. Why, she sips, then lowers the cup. Because that is where people hear things. The cooper rolls his eyes. People hear things everywhere. That is what ears do. She ignores him with the steadiness of long practice. This is different. My sister's girl swears she heard knocking in the wall there after Compline. 3 nights now. Soft. Not rat soft. Hand soft. The drover nearest the fire crosses himself without much thought. The other does the same, but more discreetly, as if not wanting to look eager in front of his friend. Some swear that walls remember the dead once they have held enough winters. Some swear old mortar catches voices and gives them back years later in weather fit for haunting. Even now, it is hard to tell whether such tales are fed by grief, cold, or the simple fact that darkness improves every noise into a mystery. Probably shutter chains, says the landlord, or loose boards, or a soul not settled, says the old woman. Then it should pay for a room, he mutters. You nearly laugh into your crust. One of the drovers leans forward. There was talk on the South Road too. A monk walking after dark, alone. At that, you pay closer attention. Hamo's warnings are already turning practical. What sort of monk, you ask? The drover shrugs. Brown robe, mud to the knees, bundle under his arm. Could be from the abbey upriver, could be from nowhere good. He did not stop at the shrine, which I noticed. The old woman nods sharply, as though this settles the matter against the man forever. A true monk always nods to a saint. The landlord snorts. A true monk also pays his ale tab, yet the world remains fallen. The cooper finally stirs from the fire. There was a man in town 2 winters ago dressed like a friar who turned out to be a dice cheat from Norwich. The landlord raises a finger. That was not because of the robe. That was because he smiled too much. A useful lesson, perhaps. You tuck the last of the bread into your cheek and listen while the stories turn and overlap a peddler seen near the ditch. A woman who swears her hens stop laying when the moon shows red through mist. A child cured of fever by a scrap of cloth touched to a saint's reliquary, though the priest says the rosemary likely did more. A cartwheel broken outside the north gate where the ground always sinks after rain. A charm of rowan berries tied above a stable door to keep mares calm before foaling. One tale slides into another because that is how towns hold themselves together, not with records alone, but with repeated murmurs, half-remembered warnings, and the little reputations that cling to roads, corners, wells, and doorways. You begin sorting them without even trying. Which stories are smoke with no fire beneath? Which are fears with the shape of truth? Which are merely loneliness put into words because the night is long, and people dislike admitting they are frightened of ordinary sounds? The old woman has not finished with you. She beckons you a little closer and lowers her voice. Her breath smells of ale, fennel, and age. If you pass the chapel yard before dawn, mind the yew. Do not stand beneath it longer than needed. Why not? Because trees hear prayers, she says simply, and some keep them. The landlord flaps his cloth at her. If the yew kept half the prayers said under it, it would have collapsed from embarrassment. Still, you file the warning away. A guard collects such things the way a cloak collects smoke without asking, and seldom without consequence. At last the landlord begins herding everyone toward the door with the solemn resolve of a bishop dismissing a troublesome flock. The drovers pull up their hoods and stumble off toward their lodging. The cooper rises with the slowness of a man whose knees have been negotiated with rather than obeyed. The old woman drains her cup, stands straighter than anyone expects, and taps your wrist once with 2 dry fingers. "Listen more than you speak," she says. Night tells on people. Then she goes. The landlord bars the door behind the last of them and nods toward you. You heard enough to keep you busy, possibly too much. He smiles without joy. That means you're doing it correctly. You step back out into the lane, and the cold meets you so suddenly that the alehouse warmth feels, within a breath, like something imagined. Behind you the fire sinks lower. The candle by St. Julian glows softly through the shutter crack, and the voices are gone. Ahead, the town waits again in its dim restraint wet stones, hanging signs, bolted doors, smoke drifting low under the stars. You tap your staff once and listen. The stories are with you now. Chapel Lane, the West Ditch, a monk on the road, a wall that may or may not knock in the dark. Guarding, you realize, is less a matter of certainty than of carrying a pocketful of rumours without letting them rattle too loudly in your head. So you walk on into the sleeping streets, a little warmer in the hands, a little wiser in the ears, and considerably more aware that half the labour of a town after curfew consists of deciding which fear deserves a lantern and which deserves to be left alone. You leave the alehouse behind, its last ember glow shrinking into the cracks of its shutter like a secret unwilling to travel, and the lane ahead opens gradually toward the outer edge of the town where timber gives way to earth, and the smell of people thins into the smell of cold ground. Your boots carry you toward the palisade, that long rough line of sharpened stakes driven into the soil beyond the stone wall's weaker stretches, where wood stands in for masonry and hope stands in for certainty. The air shifts as you approach. It grows clearer, sharper, with a bite that slips through wool and finds skin with practiced ease. Frost has begun to gather along the edges of things, on the low fence rails, on the brims of empty carts, on the iron rings fixed into posts. Each breath you take rises in a pale cloud that lingers for a moment before dissolving into the dark. The stars above feel closer here, no longer tangled in chimney smoke, but clean and watchful. A watchfire burns near the ditch, just beyond the palisade line, its glow licking upward in restless orange tongues. 2 guards stand nearby, cloaks drawn tight, their silhouettes shifting as they stamp their feet against the cold. One holds a spear upright like a second spine. The other crouches nearer the fire, turning a stick in the embers with the patience of someone who has made peace with long hours. All well you call, remembering Hamo's instruction. There is a pause, as if the night itself considers whether to answer. "Well enough," comes the reply. It seems to be the proper phrase for everything that is not actively on fire. You draw nearer, your staff tapping against the frozen ground now instead of stone, the sound duller, more absorbed. The ditch runs black and still beside the palisade, its shallow water reflecting the firelight in trembling ribbons. Beyond it stretch fields turned to shadow, furrows faintly visible where the frost has taken hold more deeply in the low places. Somewhere out there a fox barks, sharp and sudden, and then silence falls again, thicker for the interruption. "Cold work," says the standing guard as you approach. It seems determined to prove itself. You answer. He grunts. which might mean agreement or merely that his face has frozen into one expression for the night. Up close, you see that his beard is rimmed with frost, tiny crystals clinging to the hairs like salt. His gloves are patched at the fingers, and the leather has gone stiff with damp. The crouching guard glances up at you briefly, then back to the fire, as if measuring whether your presence will improve it. It does not, but he accepts it anyway. You stand with them a moment, letting the heat reach your hands, though it never quite reaches your bones. Fires in the open have a way of promising more than they deliver. Any trouble you ask. The crouching guard pokes at the embers. Wind, foxes, one owl that thinks itself a trumpet. The standing guard shifts his spear slightly, and talk. Talk travels faster than carts, you say. Faster than truth, he replies. You nod. The stories from the alehouse settle again in your mind, like ash drifting back down after a stirred fire. The peddler by the ditch, the monk on the road, the knocking wall. Each one feels less certain out here, where the night is wider and less inclined to hold on to human fears. Still, the ditch draws your attention. It lies just beyond the reach of the firelight, its surface dark and unwelcoming. Some swear that ditches like this collect more than water, that they gather whispers, lost things, even the occasional unlucky spirit that failed to find its way elsewhere. No one can quite agree whether such beliefs come from the stillness of the water or the simple fact that people dislike staring into places where they cannot see the bottom. You lean slightly forward, peering into the black surface. For a moment, you think you see movement, a ripple, perhaps, or just the reflection of the fire shifting behind you. Careful, says the crouching guard without looking up. It will not show you anything worth seeing. You straighten, deciding that wisdom sometimes arrives in the form of disinterest. The palisade itself creaks softly in the wind, the sharpened tops of the stakes knocking faintly against one another like teeth chattering in the cold. It is not a comforting sound, but it is a familiar one. Wood moves. Wood complains. Wood reminds you that it was once alive and is not entirely resigned to its current duties. You begin your circuit along the line, leaving the watchfire behind. The ground here is uneven, churned by boots and cartwheels when the day is busy, now hardened into ridges and hollows that test your footing. Your staff becomes less a symbol and more a necessity, tapping ahead, finding steadier ground before your weight commits to it. To your right, the palisade stretches into darkness, its form broken occasionally by gaps where repairs have been made, new timber set beside old, the colour not yet faded to match. To your left, the ditch runs parallel, a narrow black companion that reflects the stars in broken fragments. You walk slowly, as Hamo instructed, not lazy, not hurried, each step measured, each breath visible, each sound considered. The night here has a different voice than the town within the walls. There are fewer human noises, fewer clues to interpret. Instead, there is the whisper of wind through grass, the faint rustle of something small moving unseen, the distant creak of a cart far beyond the fields, and once the soft thud of something dropping into the ditch with a splash too quiet to identify. You pause, listen, nothing follows. Even now, it is hard to tell whether such sounds belong to harmless creatures or to stories waiting for someone to believe them. You move on. At one point along the palisade, you come across a small charm tied to one of the stakes, a twist of red thread, a sprig of dried herb, and a tiny iron nail bound together with surprising care. It hangs just at eye level, swaying slightly in the breeze. You touch it lightly. It is cold, but intact. Someone placed it here deliberately. Perhaps a guard before you. Perhaps a villager who believed the outer edge of the town needed a little extra persuasion to remain secure. Some swear that iron wards off ill things. Others insist that it is the intention behind the charm that matters. Those who tell the tale never fully agree, but the charm remains, and no one has taken it down. You leave it as you found it. The circuit continues, the rhythm of your steps settling into something almost meditative. Tap, step, breath, tap, step, breath. The staff becomes an extension of your arm, your senses stretching outward through it, reading the ground, the air, the quiet. In the distance, the bell from the town tower sounds again, marking the passing of another hour. The note carries cleanly out here, unbroken by walls or roofs, and it seems to hang longer in the open air before fading. You count it without thinking. Time moves differently at night, slower, perhaps, or simply more honestly. By the time you reach the next watchfire, your toes have begun to forget their purpose, and your fingers feel as though they belong to someone else entirely. The guards here nod as you approach, their faces lit from below by the fire, making them look briefly like figures from a story told to frighten children into staying indoors. All well, you call again. Well enough, they answer. And so the night continues, not with great events, but with these small confirmations, these quiet reassurances passed from one cold soul to another. You complete the outer stretch of your circuit and turn back toward the town, the stone walls rising again ahead of you, solid and indifferent. Behind you, the palisade fades into darkness, the ditch swallowing the last of the firelight. As you step once more onto the paved lane within the walls, the change feels immediate. The ground is firmer, the air is thicker, the sounds of sleeping life return, faint but present, and you realize, with a slow, steady certainty, that the outer defences are not only wood and water and watchfires, they are also you, walking, listening, enduring. You return from the palisade with the cold worked deep into your sleeves and the smell of smoke caught in your cloak, and the town receives you again not with comfort exactly, but with walls, which in a winter night amount to much the same thing. The stone lanes hold a different darkness from the open fields. Out there, the dark is broad and honest. In here, it folds itself into archways, eaves, shutters, and little passages where a cat could vanish with half the town's sins and never explain itself. The bell's last note has barely faded when you hear it 3 careful knocks from the direction of the postern passage. Not loud, not panicked, deliberate. You stop at once, staff lowered a little, listening for a second sound. There it is again. 3 knocks, patient as a man trying not to offend a door with higher rank than his own. Hamo's words come back at once. You open for no cheerful stranger. You turn toward the smaller gate in the wall, the one tucked off the main lane behind a short bend of stone where moss grows in the cracks, and the air always seems colder. A lantern burns near the passage mouth, but weakly, its horn sides filmed with soot, so that the light is more suggestion than certainty. The oak of the postern stands shut and black beneath its straps of iron, with the wicket latch and lock plate glimmering dully in the glow. Another set of knocks, still measured. You approach until your boots are on the worn threshold stones. Who calls you ask through the door. There is a pause, then a man's voice, low and tired. A brother on the road. I ask shelter till dawn. You do not open. Name your house. Brother Matin, he says, of St. Bride's Cell above the Marsh Road. You have never heard of St. Bride's Cell above the Marsh Road. This proves almost nothing. There are enough shrines, cells, priories, chapels, and half-remembered religious outposts scattered across the countryside to stock three heavens and a decent argument. What brings you at this hour, you ask? Rain on the road delayed me. Then a cart overturned near the ford. I gave help where I could. The answer comes too smoothly, and yet the smoothness may simply be practice. Clergy spend much of a life explaining themselves to suspicious laymen, especially when they appear after dark with mud on the hem. You lean closer to the door. Are you alone for now? Not the most comforting phrasing. You put your eye to the little viewing slit, but the angle gives you only a broken impression, a shoulder in dark wool, the edge of a hood, a hand resting against the plank. At least it is a human hand, which at this hour counts as progress. Stand back from the door, you say. To your mild surprise, he obeys at once. You hear the rustle of cloth and one foot scraping on grit. You unhook the long key from your belt, slide it into the lock and turn it only as far as needed to shift the inner bolt. The iron gives with a deep complaint. You ease the wicket open a hand's breadth and lift the lantern higher. There he is. A monk, or at least a man presenting very convincingly as one. His robe is brown and caked with mud to the knees. A rope belt hangs askew at his waist, and beneath his hood you see a pale, tired face sharpened by the cold. His beard is no more than 2 days old, which suggests either travel or imperfect discipline. Over one shoulder he carries a satchel darkened by wet. Under his arm is a wrapped bundle, narrow and long enough to be inconvenient, tied in waxed cloth. His sandals are a scandal against the weather. You open the wicket no wider. That is a hard road for holy feet. He glances down, then back at you. I have lately considered the virtues of boots. A good answer. Annoyingly, the rain he mentioned has not yet truly come, but the air has that swollen weight to it, as though the clouds are standing just beyond the town with full buckets, waiting for a signal, damp beads along the monk's lashes. He smells of wet wool, road clay, and a faint trace of herbs, perhaps rosemary or sage crushed somewhere in his satchel. What is in the bundle, you ask? His hand tightens on it, almost invisibly. Books. Everyone says that. In my defence, these are actually books. You nearly smile, which is dangerous in a guard. Smiling makes people think you're a door rather than the person attached to it. Unwrap it. He hesitates, and that hesitation is enough to make your grip shift on the staff. Slowly, you add. He crouches stiffly, lowering the bundle onto the threshold stones just beyond the wicket gap. His fingers are reddened with cold and ink-stained at the edges, which does support the book theory more than most men realise. He unties the cord and folds back the waxed cloth. Inside are not treasure, nor knives, nor suspicious silver candlesticks from some abbey that has recently misplaced them. They are indeed books, 3 of them, narrow and hand-bound, with leather covers swollen slightly by damp. One has a brass clasp, another has loose stitching at the spine. Tucked beside them is a wooden case holding pens, a little horn of ink sealed with wax, and what appears to be a packet of dried leaves. Medicinals, he says, seeing your gaze. Comfrey, sage, willow bark, for the guest infirmary. This is either exactly what it seems or a very imaginative smuggler's performance. No relics, you ask. He blinks. No relics. No finger bones of doubtful saints, not even a doubtful knuckle. That is joke number 2 from the clergy, and you begin to distrust him on principle. Still, there is nothing here immediately alarming. One of the books bears a little painted cross on the inside cover. Another is so heavily glossed with notes in the margins that only a truly dedicated thief would choose it for profit. Ink-stained scribes have a way of turning parchment into a kind of fortification all its own. Behind you, a step sounds in the passage, Hamo, of course, appearing with the supernatural timing of a man whose true gift is being exactly where negligence would least prefer him. He takes in the scene in one glance, you at the wicket, monk outside, bundle open. What have we a brother on the road, you say. Matin, from St. Bride's cell above the marsh road. Hamo grunts at the monk. Never heard of it. Few have. The monk says mildly. That is part of its charm. Hamo peers through the gap. And what is your business with this town to reach the abbey at dawn? I carry copied sermons and herbalists for the infirmarian. Why arrive after curfew? A cart broke at the ford. The ox had the stronger opinion. Hamo considers this. You can tell he finds it plausible because medieval life is full of carts developing opinions at the worst possible moment. And why not stop at the roadside shrine house? It was already crowded with drovers, 2 coughing children, and one man asleep on the bench who claimed he was not asleep every time he snored. Hamo gives the faintest nod. That, too, sounds accurate. The reeve squats with a creak in his knees and inspects the books without touching them. Can you read? He asks suddenly. The monk looks almost offended. I should hope so. Read a line. The monk picks up the top book, opens it near the middle, and in the lantern light begins to read a Latin sentence in a dry, clear voice that means nothing to you and everything to Hamo, who cannot understand it either, but recognizes the tone of legitimate scholarship, the way one recognizes a church floor by how cold it feels. Enough, Hamo says. No liar reads that willingly after midnight. The monk closes the book with the grave patience of a man who has won an argument he did not enjoy. Yet still Hamo does not open the full door. This is the part you begin to respect most. Courtesy is not surrender. Pity is not permission. A town guard must live in the narrow path between hardness and gullibility, which is a road with mud on both sides. Brother Matin, Hamo says, we can give you passage to the guest shed by the chapel wall, no farther tonight. At dawn, you go to the abbey porter and explain yourself there. Until then, your bundle stays tied, and you walk where our man walks. The monk bows his head. Gladly, Hamo looks at you. You escort him. So the postern opens. The door swings back with a groan, and the monk steps inside, bringing with him the smell of wet road and outside darkness. He's a little taller than you expected, and thinner. Mud flakes from his hem onto the stones. Up close you notice a small wooden pilgrim badge stitched under his cloak seam, almost hidden a saint's boat, perhaps, or a fish, a private token, a kept vow. No one can quite agree whether such badges protect the traveller or merely reassure the mother who sewed them on. You retie his bundle and hand it back. He accepts it with a nod that is neither servile nor proud, simply tired. You set off together through the lane toward the chapel quarter. Your staff knocks softly. His sandals whisper on the stones. From somewhere high above comes the faint rattle of loose shutter hooks in the wind, and for one odd moment you remember the old woman's warning about Chapel Lane and walls that knock back. Do many arrive this late? The monk asks after a while. Only the memorable ones. That is usually bad. It is rarely restful. He inclines his head, as though this confirms a theology he already suspected. You pass beneath a carved saint in a niche, through a bend where rainwater drips from the eaves though no rain has yet fallen, and into the darker streets that lead toward the chapel yard. Between you there is caution, yes, but also the simple companionship of 2 men walking awake while others sleep, guard and monk, staff and bundle. suspicion and courtesy bound together like wet cords. And as you escort him onward, you begin to understand that night watch is not merely about keeping danger out. Sometimes it is about deciding, with cold hands and imperfect certainty, which tired stranger may safely be let in. You walk with Brother Matin through the sleeping lanes, and the town seems to notice the pair of you in its own small ways, a shutter twitching above, a dog lifting its head from a doorstep and deciding, after one thoughtful blink, that neither holiness nor municipal duty is worth barking at. The monk keeps pace without complaint, though his sandals make a soft wet sound on the stones that grows more pitiful with every corner. It is the sort of footwear that belongs in illuminated manuscripts, where no one has to consider frostbitten toes. The chapel quarter rises gradually ahead, marked first by smell rather than sight. The air here holds beeswax, damp yew, old stone, and that cool chalky scent of burial-ground earth turned many times and then left to rest. When at last the chapel itself comes into view, it is less grand than the abbey churches sung about by pilgrims, and more intimate than any lord's pride would allow a sturdy building of pale stone with a squat bell-cote, leaded windows dim behind horn panes, and a porch worn smooth by centuries of hands, rain, and knees. Beside it stretches the chapel yard, enclosed by a low wall, where crooked grave markers lean like tired teeth, and a single yew tree gathers the dark under its branches more thickly than the rest of the night. You remember the old woman's warning at once. Mind the yew. Do not stand beneath it longer than needed. Brother Matin follows your gaze. A handsome tree, he says. That depends whom you ask. In my experience, that is true of trees, abbots, and cold porridge. You grant him that. The guest shed by the chapel wall is little more than a lean structure roofed in timber shingles, meant for late travellers, poor pilgrims, and the occasional soul too sick to be turned away yet not welcome in the better rooms. It stands under the lee of the wall where the wind is less ambitious. A tiny lamp burns within, making the horn window glow the colour of weak honey. You lift the latch and peer in first. 2 benches, 1 straw pallet, a little brazier with more ash than heat, and a clay jug resting beside a wooden cup. No lurking bandits, no mysterious relic thieves, only the ordinary poverty of charitable lodging. Hammer was right. It will do till dawn. You sleep here, you say. The monk inclines his head. I have slept in worse. I do not doubt it. He pauses at the threshold, then looks back at the yard. Do people in this town always speak of the yew? Enough people do. He studies the tree for a moment, its black limbs spread wide over the graves. Every place keeps one thing the dark enlarges. That is a priest's answer, a copyist's answer, actually. Priests use more incense. You leave him to his palate, though not before making sure the brazier can be coaxed to a little life and the jug is not empty. The monk unwraps none of his books. Good. Exhaustion has beaten scholarship for now. He murmurs a thanks, then sits on the bench with the slow care of a man whose spine has held too many miles. When you shut the shed door behind him, the latch sounds small in the open yard, and there it is. Midnight. The chapel bell does not thunder like the town curfew. It tolls deep and singular, each strike seeming to fall through the dark rather than across it. One, then another, until the whole square of air above the yard feels rippled by bronze. You stand by the low wall and listen, your staff grounded, your breath rising pale in the bell's slow measure. Somewhere farther off, the town tower answers with its own note, and then for a few heartbeats the whole place is stitched together by sound chapel, town, wall, lane, sleeping house, watchfire, all agreeing that the middle of the night has arrived whether anyone feels prepared or not. From where you stand, you can see the edge of the market square beyond the lane. It lies open and empty under the moon, wider and stranger than it ever does by day. The stalls are shuttered and roped, their awnings tied down, their counters bare. Weighing tables stand abandoned like altars to commerce temporarily denied. A great market cross rises from the centre, its stone shaft washed pale by the moonlight, and the worn steps at its base gleam with damp. Hanging signs creak over the bordering shops. The well cover catches a silver line. A heap of straw left by a cart shifts faintly in the wind. By day the square is elbows, bargains, geese, toll arguments, spilled turnips, and enough gossip to sustain a monastery for a month. By midnight it is almost ceremonial. The emptiness gives each object importance. A scale hook, a dropped cabbage leaf, a broken basket hoop. Even the puddles seem to be observing silence. You cross into the square slowly, boots sounding more loudly here on the open stones. Your lantern light moves over the deserted stalls, fishmongers' boards scrubbed but still smelling faintly of river and salt. Cloth merchants' shutters bolted against damp. The butcher's trestle washed clean enough to satisfy the eye but not the nose. Near the pillory stands a cask half covered with sacking. You prod it with the staff. Empty, just as well. Nothing improves a night round less than discovering a drunk under municipal furniture. The moon sits high enough now to show the roofs in soft slate and silver. Frost shines along the edges of the market cross. A torn scrap of red wool clings to one nail on a stall post, bright as a berry in the cold light. It makes you think of the charm tied at the palisade, of rowan thread and iron nails and all the little ways people persuade themselves that the world can still be nudged towards safety. Some swear a town square at midnight reveals truth better than daylight, because no one is performing for anyone. Others say the opposite, that moonlight lies politely and makes every ordinary thing look touched by omen. Those who tell the tale never fully agree. Standing here now, you see the argument. The square is only wood, stone, straw, and shadows. The square is also full of suggestions. You circle the market cross and rest a gloved hand against its step. The stone is wet and bitterly cold. Pilgrims sometimes leave little wax drippings here, or tie threads at the lower carving where the saints' feet have been smoothed by centuries of fingers. Tonight there is only one fresh offering, a tiny crust of bread tucked in a crack near the base. Perhaps for birds, perhaps for luck, perhaps left by some child who believes holy stone enjoys a snack as much as anyone else. Medieval theology can be remarkably domestic. At the far edge of the square hangs the public weighing beam, its chain swaying very slightly in the wind. The sound it makes is so faint you almost mistake it for speech. You stand still and let the night separate itself into parts. The chain, a shutter tapping once and then settling, water dripping from a gutter, a horse shifting in some unseen stable, a cough behind a wall, nothing more. Yet after the alehouse talk, every small noise arrives with a second shadow, wall knocking, ditch whispers, a monk on the road. Once rumours enter the ear, they borrow the furniture of the night and sit there comfortably. You make your round of the square's edges, checking the lane mouths one by one. At the draper's corner, a cat slips between barrels with the smooth contempt particular to cats, who have never respected civic authority and likely never will. At the baker's lane, flour dust still shows pale on the threshold where sacks were dragged earlier. At the tallow chandler's side, The smell of rendered fat clings stubbornly in the cold. Near the tax board, a chalk tally remains visible despite the damp. Listing market tolls in a hand so cramped it looks like the scribe was charged by the letter. Then, near the west side of the square, something moves. You stop. It is only a hanging sign rocking more sharply than the others, though the air around you seems almost still. The sign bears a painted lamb and shears, faded with years, and it creaks once, twice, then settles. You stare at it long enough to feel mildly foolish. Congratulations, you murmur to the sign. You remain wool-related. A dry joke? Yes, but the night encourages talking to objects. They listen better than many people. At the square's centre again, you turn full circle. Empty stalls, market cross, well cover, moonlit roofs, no thieves, no fires, no miraculous apparitions in the cabbage leaves. Just the town between one day's trade and the next, paused like a held breath. And yet there is company of a sort, not human exactly, but the residue of human life. Here passed merchants with bolts of cloth. Here stood peasants with eggs in baskets. Here argued toll men and mule drivers and women selling onions by the handful. Here a peddler may have lied, a child may have stolen an apple, a pilgrim may have asked the price of candles, a widow may have sold the last goose that stood between her and winter debt. The square keeps all of it in scuffed stone and worn wood, as if commerce itself leaves a sediment. The bell's echoes are gone now. Midnight has settled fully. The square belongs to you, to the moon, and to whatever creatures move softly enough not to pay tolls. You pull your cloak tighter and start toward the next lane. The night is at its deepest point, but not its quietest. That comes later, when even the restless sleepers surrender and the first bakers have not yet woken. For now the town still shifts in its dreams, and you move through the middle of it, watching the market sleep under the moon as though it were a great patient animal, emptied of noise but not of memory. You leave the market square with the moon at your shoulder and the chapel bell's last depth still faintly moving through your chest, and as you turn back toward the gate quarter, the air changes before the weather does. It thickens. The wind loses its edge and gains weight, as though the night has drawn a wet cloak around itself. The roofs ahead shine a little more darkly. Somewhere a shutter knocks once and then again. Somewhere else a horse gives a low, uneasy sound from its stall. You look up toward the clouds and find that the stars above the eastern wall have begun to vanish one by one. Rain, then. Not the wild summer sort that hammers fields flat and makes saints of no one, but a patient winter rain, the kind that arrives with a long memory and every intention of staying where it is not wanted. By the time you reach the gatehouse bend, the first drops are falling. They strike the stones with soft scattered ticks, darkening the paving, marking the shoulders of your cloak, drawing a smell from the town that has been waiting all evening beneath the cold, wet timber, old mortar, dung, soot, wool, leather, and the mineral breath of stone finally surrendering its dryness. It is not an unpleasant smell, exactly. It is simply honest. You duck beneath the outer overhang of the gatehouse just as the rain finds its rhythm. Water begins running from the roof in silver cords, splashing into the gutter with a noise almost cheerful at first. A lantern swings above the arch, its light trembling behind rain-beaded horn. Inside the passage, the warmth is slight, but the roof makes it feel luxurious. A second guard is already there, seated on a low bench near the inner wall with one boot stretched toward a brazier and the other unlaced halfway, as if he began repairing his dignity and then lost interest. He is younger than Hamo, but older than you first guessed from the dark. With broad cheeks reddened by wind and a beard that has collected 2 crumbs and a drop of rainwater, a chunk of coarse bread rests on his knee, and beside him lies a small onion, a knife, and a horn cup that smells faintly of ale even from where you stand. He glances up at you, at the rain, and back to the bread. Looks like heaven has found another bucket. That one appears to have a hole in the bottom, you say, brushing water from your sleeves. He grins. Sit, then, before it starts baptizing properly. You lean your staff against the wall and take the place at the far end of the bench, near enough to the brazier to feel the heat on your shins, not near enough to claim friendship without earning it. The rain strengthens outside. Soon the whole gate passage is stitched with sound roof drip. Gutter splash. Distant hiss where water strikes the watchfire beyond the ditch. The occasional hollow plink from drops finding iron. The guard offers the bread by breaking off a piece with his thumb. Tib, he says. North Wall yesterday. Gatehouse tonight. You give your name in return and accept the crust. It is coarse bread, heavy with rye and a little sour from age, but in the middle it remains mercifully chewable. Tib peels the onion with his knife and salt-cracked fingers, then halves it and hands you the smaller piece without ceremony. Feast day fare, he says. Your standards are dangerously high. He bites into his half with the expression of a man too tired to pretend vegetables are a moral victory. The onion is sharp enough to wake parts of your head that had begun to dim. You eat it with the bread and feel, for a brief radiant moment, almost human again. Rain does this to a guard's duty. It shortens horizons. The town beyond the arch becomes a blurred arrangement of glistening stones and streaming eaves, and all the world seems narrowed to whatever roof you can stand under, whatever ember still glows, whatever company happens to be equally damp. The storm need not be great to become intimate. Tib drinks from the horn cup, wipes his mouth with the back of his hand, and jerks his chin toward the rain. Good for catching fools, bad for hearing them. How many fools do you usually catch in this weather? Mostly the same ones slowed down. The brazier clicks softly, settling its coals. Somewhere overhead a guard calls the wall signal and receives the answer well enough through the downpour, though the words come blurred by the rain into something that could just as easily be a prayer. For a while you sit without speaking, which is its own kind of courtesy at night. The sound of the rain fills the spaces where day would force conversation. Water runs down the grooves of the gate arch and gathers at the threshold. The smell of wet wool thickens. Steam rises faintly from Tib's cloak where it hangs near the brazier, and the room begins to smell of sheep, smoke, onions, and iron. A glamorous life. The chroniclers somehow forgot to mention. At length Tib nudges the knife toward you so you can trim a splinter from the bread if you wish. You heard the talk about the West Ditch. I heard several versions. He nods, as though this confirms the quality of your sources. There's always talk in rain. Makes people think the town is whispering, but does it only if the drains back up. That earns a dry breath of laughter from you, and perhaps that is all that is needed. Conversation settles in after that, not hurried, not deliberate, but in the way coals catch one another when shifted slightly closer. He tells you of a pig once found asleep in the tax booth after a storm, having forced its way through a broken board and eaten half a clerk's tally roll. He tells you of a carter who swore blind that a saint's relic cured his mule's cough, only for the beast to die 2 days later after eating lampwick. He tells you of a woman in the lower lane who ties garlic and vervain above her shutter every autumn, because her grandmother believed fever enters through poorly mannered windows. No one can quite agree whether it helps, Tib says, but it certainly discourages visitors. You offer him the monk's tale in return. The sandals, the books. Hemo making him read Latin at the wicket like a roadside miracle under inspection. Tib nearly chokes on the last of his onion. Poor devil. Nothing proves innocence faster than being forced to perform scholarship in the rain. Except, perhaps, carrying herb lists. That only proves he knows sick people. The rain goes on. Outside the arch, the lane shines like hammered lead. A late drop from the roof finds the back of your neck and slips down with malicious precision. You shiver and pull the cloak tighter. Tib notices and reaches behind the brazier for a folded scrap of old sackcloth. "Put that on the bench first," he says. "Stone steals heat faster than thieves steal chickens. You do." And he is right. Medieval wisdom is very often just practical misery refined over generations. From a peg by the wall hangs a small handbell, not the alarm bell itself, but a lesser one used for signalling within the gatehouse. Tib glances at it as the rain intensifies and mutters, "Best not need that tonight. Fire would be cruel in weather like this." Fire is always cruel. Rain just makes it smokier. His face, lit by the brazier, looks older for a moment. You remember Hamo's rule? If there is fire, you raise the bell. If there is blood, fetch help before cleverness. Towns like this are always one overturned lamp, one careless ember, one drunken stumble from panic. That is why the keys matter, why the rounds matter, why a wet night can feel more dangerous than a noisy one. Everything is muted, but nothing is safe. Tib seems to read the shape of your thought. "Do not worry yourself into ghosts," he says. "Most nights are only wet, cold, and longer than they ought to be, and the rest becomes stories told by people who are sensibly somewhere else." Outside, two figures hurry through the gate passage from the inner lane, women with baskets under their cloaks, heads bent, moving fast enough to suggest some domestic emergency not dramatic enough to interest officials. Tib watches them go, Baker's wife and her sister. I think. Their oven likely drew badly in the damp. You can tell that from a basket, I can tell that from the pace. Flower folk move like worry with aprons. Again you laugh, and the sound feels strange but welcome in the rain-heavy dark. A little later, Tib takes from his pouch a pinch of dried fennel seed mixed with something sweeter and chews it slowly. He offers you some for the breath, he says. And because old Mira in Herb Lane swears it keeps the night air from settling on the chest. You accept a few seeds. They taste of anise, damp wood, and faint stubborn hope. Folk cures multiply wherever cold and poverty meet. Leeches for swelling, honey on wounds, willow bark for pain, sage for the throat, goose fat on cracked heels, charms under pillows, saints over doorways. Half of medieval survival is medicine. The other half is giving the medicine a story so people remember to trust it. The rain softens at last from steady fall to patient dripping. The gutters still run, but less urgently now. Beyond the arch, the town begins to reappear in pieces, the outline of the lane, the blur of a shutter, the pale edge of the opposite wall. Tib stands with a grunt, laces his boot properly and reaches for his spear. There! The sky has exhausted itself complaining. You rise too, reclaiming your staff. Your knees protest in a tone both mild and ancient. "Thank you," you say, meaning the bread, the onion, the sackcloth, the company, and the brief illusion that the night had shrunk to something manageable. Tib waves it off. Pass it on when the next poor fool comes in soaked. Then he steps toward the arch to resume his post, and you step back into the lane where the rain still hangs in the air like breath. The stones shine, the roofs drip, the town smells washed but not cleansed, softened but not asleep. Your round continues through the damp dark, warmed for the moment by bread. brazier smoke, and the old quiet fellowship of people who keep watch while others dream. You step back out from the gatehouse shelter into a town made glossy by rain, and for a little while the whole place seems gentler for having been washed. Water drips from eaves in steady threads. The gutters run dark and quick between the stones. Lantern light stretches longer on the paving now, smearing itself across puddles until every step you take seems to disturb a small broken moon. The cold has not lessened, but it has become a wetter, quieter cold. One that slides into cuffs and hems rather than striking cleanly through cloth. Your cloak smells of smoke and damp wool and onion, which is not noble, but it is undeniably authentic. The lane beyond the gatehouse is nearly empty. A shutter closes somewhere above with a soft thump. A horse stamps once in a stable yard and then is still. The rain has driven the town inward, deeper into blankets, into banked coals, into the little mutterings of sleepers turning over in draughty beds. Even your own footfalls seem softer now, as if the wet stones are trying not to wake anyone. You make for the fish lane again, staff tapping lightly, eyes moving from doorway to archway to shadow, and it is there, by a heap of damp baskets under an awning, that you first notice the dog. At first you take it for part of the baskets themselves, a dark shape tucked low against the wall, too still to claim full importance. Then it lifts its head. Two pale eyes catch the lantern glow. One ear rises, the other, sadly, has surrendered to some older argument and folds at a permanent angle. The creature is not large, though rain and mud have conspired to make it look rougher than it likely is. Its coat is brown under the dirt, or perhaps black under the brown. At this hour and in this weather, certainty seems ambitious. Its ribs show faintly. Its tail lies wrapped around its paws with the resignation of someone waiting outside a door that has never once opened on time. You stop. The dog watches. Well, you say softly, you're either a companion or an accusation. The dog blinks, which settles nothing. You take one step forward, it remains where it is. You take another, and only then does it rise, shake itself once with mournful thoroughness, and step out from under the awning. Water flicks from its coat. It is smaller than you thought. Its paws look too large for its frame, as if it has not yet decided whether to become a proper dog or remain a collection of inconveniences with ears. Go on, you tell it, gesturing vaguely toward anywhere else. The dog lowers its head, then follows you. Not close, not with cheerful devotion, simply at a respectful distance of 6 or 7 paces, like a minor official whose duties have not been explained properly. You continue down the lane. The dog continues behind you. At the next corner you stop abruptly and turn. The dog stops too, one paw lifted, face composed into perfect innocence. You understand. You murmur, I am not in a position to acquire responsibilities. The dog sits down. This is unhelpful. You walk on. The town after rain is all smells, wet rushes, soot loosened from chimney mouths, the sour trace of spilled ale lifted fresh from the threshold boards. Fish, of course, though quieter now. Leather, dung, damp hay, the faint sweetness of apples stored badly. Somewhere nearby, rosemary and thyme from a kitchen bunch hung to dry and now regretting the moisture. Dogs live by such maps, you imagine. To this small fellow the whole lane must be a manuscript brighter than any scribe's work. Written in grease and hoof, onion skin and gutter water. You pass the cooper's yard, where the barrels gleam softly in the wet, and glance back again. Still there. The dog is threading between puddles with serious concentration, one ear up, one ear lost to history. At the mouth of Chapel Lane it pauses and sniffs the air, then trots a little quicker until it has nearly caught up. You think of the old woman at the alehouse, of the yew tree, of walls that knock, of all the sounds people lend to the dark when they do not wish to admit they are lonely. The dog, at least, asks for no story. It is merely damp and alive. At a porch step you kneel, slowly enough not to startle it. Come here, then. The dog considers. It does not rush in. It comes forward by increments, nose first, paws silent on the wet stones. Up close, it smells of rainwater, mud, old straw, and the unmistakable sharpness of a creature that has lived too long on scraps and luck. A leather thong still hangs at its neck, though whatever tag or ribbon once hung from it is gone. So it belonged to someone, or nearly belonged, once. You hold out a hand, it sniffs your glove, sneezes, and then, with the grave solemnity of a lord granting a favour, permits you to touch the top of its head. Its fur is coarse and cold beneath your fingers. There is a nick in one ear, a burr caught in the coat behind its shoulder. One hind leg bears a faint limp when it shifts its weight, though not enough to stop it following. You scratch lightly under the jaw. The dog closes its eyes for a heartbeat, then opens them and looks at you as if you have now entered a contract neither of you fully read. From your pouch you retrieve the final bit of Tibbs' coarse bread, softened slightly by damp. You break it into 2 pieces and offer one. The dog takes it delicately, which is somehow worse than if it had snapped. You give it the other half at once, because you are a town guard, not a stone saint. There, you say. You have manipulated the authorities. Its tail taps the stones once. When you rise, it rises too. So the 2 of you make your round together. It changes the night at once, though in no grand or sentimental fashion. The dog does not become a banner of hope, nor a magical guardian of the lanes. It merely exists beside your watch, and that is enough. A second set of ears lifts at small noises. A second body moves through the dark. The silence becomes shared rather than singular. Even loneliness, divided by something as humble as a damp dog, loses a little of its bite. You turn down the alley behind the wool merchant's house, where rainwater still falls from a broken spout in silver drops. The dog goes first this time, trotting ahead a few paces, then looking back to ensure your cooperation. Its paws make almost no sound. Once it stops and sniffs hard at a stack of old sacks, then dismisses them as unworthy. Once it stiffens at the flutter of a pigeon disturbed under an eave, then relaxes again with the composure of someone trying not to seem embarrassed in front of a colleague. Steady, you whisper, and to your surprise the dog does indeed steady. No one can quite agree whether dogs in towns like this belong more to everyone or to no one. They guard yards, follow drovers, beg at kitchens, sleep in stables, chase rats from granaries, and adopt whoever happens to have bread in a cold moment. Some are treasured, some are tolerated, some are kicked away and return anyway, which may be the purest form of medieval resilience. There are also old beliefs about them. Some swear dogs can see things in churchyards that people cannot. Some say a dog that howls at an empty road is hearing the dead travel. Others insist a good yard dog knows a thief before the thief knows himself. Those who tell the tale never fully agree, but no night watchman entirely dislikes a dog with opinions. At the edge of the market square, the animal pauses and looks toward the chapel quarter. Its nose lifts. The one good ear tilts forward. You listen too. At first you hear nothing but the patient dripping after rain and the far, sleepy shifting of a horse in a stable. Then comes a faint sound from somewhere ahead. Not a knock, not footsteps, more like the scrape of wood on stone, brief and uncertain. The dog gives a low little huff, not quite a growl, more a note of professional concern. You rest a hand on the staff. "All right," you murmur. "That we will inspect." You follow the sound toward the lane beside the storehouses, and the dog comes with you at once, closer now, brushing your boot once as if to say that this is properly communal business. Lantern light glides over wet walls and shutter bars. The storeyard wicket stands shut, black and rain dark, with the key at your belt suddenly feeling heavier. Somewhere nearby a loose board shifts again with a small wooden complaint. Only the wind, perhaps, or damp swelling the planks. Yet because the dog heard it too, you take it more seriously than you might have alone. This is how companionship works at night. It does not make fear vanish. It simply keeps fear from becoming the only voice in the lane. You circle the yard, checking the latch, the hinges, the stacked barrels beneath the awning. The dog noses at the base of the wall, sneezes at the smell of wet turnip sacks, then sneaks a hopeful look at you in case inspections now involve supper. You disappoint it gently. When the sound does not repeat, you move on, but not before glancing down. The dog has settled into the work as if born to it, head low, tail neutral, eyes alert, one ridiculous ear, mud to the ankles, a better watchman than some men, if you are honest. By the time you reach the lower lane again, the clouds have thinned and one pale star shows through above the wall. The town remains asleep, yet no longer feels quite so empty. Your staff still knocks the stones, your keys still pull at your belt, the cold still presses in from every side. But now there's also the soft patter of paws behind you and, every so often, the brush of damp fur against your calf when the lane narrows. You do not name the dog. That would be dangerous. Names invite attachment, and attachment invites explanations in the morning. Still, when you stop beneath a lantern to trim the wick and the dog immediately sits on your cloak hem to keep close to the warmth, you find yourself saying, "You really mean to see this through, don't you?" The dog yawns, which, in fairness, is answer enough. You move on from the lower lane with the dog at your heels and the damp night hanging close around both of you, and before long you find yourself drawn back toward the storehouses where the town keeps the less glamorous forms of hope. No one sings ballads about winter turnips. No pilgrim kisses a relic of salted herring. Yet when the roads drown in mud and the fields sleep under frost, it is these plain stores' grain sacks, smoked fish, dried peas, onions strung from beams, cider casks, lamp oil, and coarse flour that stand between a household and a great deal of pious disappointment. The storeyard lies behind a stout fence of oak rails and a wicket gate darkened by rain. Beyond it stand 3 long sheds with sloping roofs, their walls tarred in places against damp, their doors banded with iron and marked in chalk for ownership and tally. One belongs mostly to the manor's levy grain, one to a consortium of merchants who would rather trust God than one another but sensibly choose locks as well, and the last to a scatter of townsfolk whose small winter reserves must be kept dry, hidden from rats and prayed over in equal measure. By day the place smells of dust, grain, rope, apples, and burlap. Tonight the rain has brought out other notes: wet wood, earth, mouse nests, old cabbage, and the sour trace of a burst cider cask from some earlier mishap. Your dog stops before you do. Its head lifts. The one good ear pricks forward. The bent ear does its best. Then the animal gives that same low huff again, not loud enough to call alarm, but clear enough to tell you that something ahead deserves a proper pair of eyes. You stand still and listen. At first there is only dripping, rain falling from the shed roof into a bucket, rain slipping off a fence rail, rain easing from the leaves of the little elder bush by the wall. Then, faintly, a scrape, wood against stone, a pause, another scrape, followed by the tiny muffled thud of something set down too quickly. Not wind this time. You ease the storeyard key from your belt. The iron feels very cold, very serious. Hamo's rules come back, one after another, but none quite cover the exact moment when hunger may be rattling someone else's latch in the dark, while a muddy dog looks at you as if to ask whether municipal heroics are finally beginning. You test the wicket gently. It is latched, but not fully. Someone has worried it from the inside bar enough to leave it resting loose. That is worse than an open gate in some ways. An open gate says boldness. A loose latch says hurry, fear, and amateur workmanship. You glance down at the dog. No barking. You whisper. The dog blinks in the pure style of a creature that has never promised anything to anyone. Very slowly, you lift the latch and ease the wicket inward. The hinges give only the smallest complaint. Good. The yard beyond is patchy with puddles and straw, and the lantern you carry throws its light in trembling smears over stacked sacks, barrel tops, and the black ribs of cart shafts leaned against the shed wall. The sheds themselves loom like sleeping cattle. Water drips from the eaves in silver lines. Somewhere within the darkness ahead, something shifts again. You step inside. The dog slips through after you without invitation, keeping low. Who is there, you call, not loudly, but with enough edge to let the question arrive wearing boots. For a heartbeat, nothing answers. Then comes a rustle behind the middle shed door, followed by the unmistakable sound of someone trying to become part of a wall and doing it badly. You lift the lantern higher, come out. Still nothing. This is often how fear behaves. It hopes silence might pass for invisibility. You move closer. The dog pads beside you, nose working furiously. The smell now reaches you through the wet wood and grain dust, not only storehouse scents, but wool cloak, stale sweat, and human breath held too long. I said come out. You repeat, or I come in. That does it. From the gap between two stacked grain sacks, crouched behind a barrel hoop and a hanging bundle of rope, emerges not a bandit, not a professional thief with dagger and clever shoes, but a boy on the edge of manhood and not thriving there. He cannot be more than 14, perhaps 15 if the winter has been unkind, which, judging from his face, it has. His hair is plastered damp to his head. His tunic is too thin for the season, and patched at both elbows with cloth that does not match. In one hand he clutches a little sack knotted shut, in the other a short wooden spoon. The spoon, more than anything, unravels the grandeur of the scene. He stares at you as one cornered creature studies another. The dog stares too, then sneezes. The boy flinches so violently that the spoon drops into the straw. Well, you say after a moment, you're not armed with much dignity. He says nothing. His mouth is set in that hard line poor people learn early, the one that means shame has already arrived and found no room left for surprise. You hold the staff where he can see it, and the lantern where he cannot avoid it. What is in the sack? He swallows. Oats. Only oats. A pause, and 2 onions. That is an insultingly modest crime. His eyes flash at that, quick and defensive. I wasn't taking much. There it is. Not denial, not a lie, just the desperate arithmetic of the hungry. The rain ticks softly on the roof above you. You look past him. One grain sack has been loosened at the mouth with a knife or perhaps just a patient fingernail. A little spill of oats lies in the straw. Another onion has rolled under the shelf. Nearby sits an empty basket that may once have held turnips. Whoever this boy is, he has not come to empty the town's reserves. He has come with a spoon, a pouch, and the sort of plan that depends more on desperation than skill. Whose son are you, you ask? His jaw tightens. No one's. That answer arrives too quickly to be true and too sadly to be challenged at once. The dog, apparently deciding the matter, has become social rather than tactical, pads forward and sniffs at the boy's bare ankle. The boy startles, then looks down. His expression changes. Only a little, but enough. Anyone who has been cold and unwanted recognizes a wet dog in 2 breaths. It followed you too, he asks. Unfortunately, the dog sits between you like a badly appointed magistrate. You lower the lantern slightly. Are you alone? He nods. How long have you been in the yard? A little while. Have you taken anything before tonight? He shakes his head. This time you believe him. Petty thieves learn better tools than spoons. You study him in the lantern glow. There is dirt under the nails, but also flour on one cuff. A baker's boy, perhaps, or someone who has begged scraps behind the ovens. His boots are different sizes. The left one is tied with twine. His nose is red from cold. But there is no ale on his breath, no swagger, no hardness of practiced theft. Just hunger, fear, and the painful effort of not pleading. No one can quite agree whether hunger makes a sinner or simply reveals how flimsy respectability becomes on an empty stomach. In sermons, the line sounds clear enough. In a wet store yard, with a spoon at your feet and a half-grown boy blinking rain from his lashes. The matter is muddier. You know I cannot simply let you walk out loaded, you say. His mouth works, I know, and I cannot ignore a broken latch. I know. The dog leans its damp shoulder against your shin. Very helpful. Why not go to the almoner at the chapel, you ask? The boy gives a short laugh with no joy in it. By dawn there's a line already, and if you are not first, there's broth mostly made of memory. That, too, rings true. Your family. He looks away. Mother's sick. Little ones are asleep. There was no bread left. There are many ways to lie, but the simplest truths often wear the fewest decorations. This one lands quietly. No grand tragedy, no plague cart, no prophecy, just a sick mother, sleeping children, and the absence of bread. The whole medieval world is built on how often that happens. You exhale through your nose and glance around the shed again, buying yourself a moment. The merchants would call this theft, and they would not be wrong. Hamo would call it trouble, and he would not be wrong either. Yet trouble comes in kinds. A man lifting bolts of cloth to sell upriver is one kind. A starving lad with onions in a pouch is another. Some swear that if a poor soul steals bread in winter, a saint turns his face away rather than watch. Others insist the saint watches very closely indeed and judges everyone present, including the keeper of the key. Those who tell the tale never fully agree. You rather wish they had. The boy seems to mistake your silence for final condemnation. He lifts the little sack with stiff fingers. Take it back, then. You hold out your hand. He gives it to you at once. It weighs almost nothing. You untie it. Oats, yes. 2 onions, yes. And one small shriveled apple that has clearly seen better weeks. You look at it and nearly sigh. The dog noses at your knee, then fixes hopeful attention on the apple, as if willing it into a new legal category. Listen to me. You say. The boy stares at the straw. You come to the chapel porch at first bell, not the guest shed, the porch. You ask for Brother Matin if he is awake, or the almoner if he is not. You say the night watch sent you. You understand his head jerks up. You know a brother I know, a wet man with books and appalling sandals. For the first time, the boy looks uncertain in a different way. Hope, when it appears suddenly, often resembles suspicion. You will return tomorrow. You go on and mend this latch under Hamo's eye if he requires it. If you run, I will know your face. If you steal again, you and I become much less conversational. He nods so hard it is nearly a bow. You take one onion from the pouch and return the rest. Then, after a moment's thought, you add the onion back in too. The merchants will survive. You may answer for it later. So be it. The boy's eyes widen. Why? Because if I keep the onion, I become ridiculous. A small sound escapes him. Not quite a laugh. Close enough. You retrieve the spoon from the straw and hand it over. Go by the lane behind the cooper's yard. No noise, no heroics. He tucks the spoon away like treasure. The dog watches him slip toward the wicket. Thin shoulders hunched. Pouch held under his tunic. At the gate he pauses and looks back once. Rain silvering his hair. Thank you, he says. Be at the chapel, you reply. Then he has gone into the dripping dark. You secure the latch properly, check the loosened grain sack, and brush the spilled oats into a neater heap with your boot. The dog immediately tries to sniff them and sneezes again. Offended by agriculture. Well, you tell it. That is one form of crisis management. The dog looks up as if expecting promotion. You stand a moment longer beneath the shed eaves, listening to the rain ease and the yard return to stillness. Fear brought you here. Yes, but fear was not the whole story. It rarely is. More often, beneath the shadow and noise, you find smaller human truths: hunger, cold, embarrassment, need. Not dramatic enough for legends, important enough to keep a town awake. Then you step back into the lane with the dog beside you, the keys at your belt, and the storehouses secure once more, though the night has grown a little heavier and a little kinder than before. You leave the storehouses behind with the latch set fast again, and the smell of wet grain still clinging faintly to your sleeves, and for a while the town feels quieter than it has all night, as though even its small troubles have drawn breath and settled. The rain has thinned to an occasional drip from eaves and shutter hooks. The clouds are breaking apart in slow grey pieces, and through them the moon returns only in fragments. A pale blur here, a bright edge there, never fully committed. This is the hour when darkness begins to tire of itself. The dog keeps close now, no longer trailing at a diplomatic distance. Its damp flank brushes your boot when the lane narrows, and every so often it trots ahead, then glances back to make sure you're maintaining proper standards. Your lantern throws a low amber circle over the stones, over the gutter running thin and black, over doorsteps where rushes have turned dark with moisture. In some houses the last candles have finally gone out. In others a little glow still lingers behind cloth or hornpane, the stubborn sign of a sick room, a sleepless mother, or a man whose work does not care what hour it is. You turn toward the chapel yard again. This is the part of the night Tib had not named, but had implied the hour when everything seems farther away than it is. The gatehouse feels distant. The market square, though only a few lanes off, might as well belong to another watchman. The open fields beyond the walls have disappeared entirely from your mind. All the world has narrowed to these stones, this dog, your own breath, and the sound of monastery time moving invisibly over sleeping roofs. The chapel appears ahead through a silver wash of mist that has begun to gather low over the yard. Not thick enough to hide anything properly, just enough to soften outlines and encourage imagination to overwork itself. The little bellcote is a smudge against the sky. The graves lean in patient disorder. The yew tree stands larger than before, not because it has changed, but because the hour has. You remember the old woman's voice at once. Mind the yew. Do not stand beneath it longer than needed. Excellent. You murmur. Now even the trees have instructions. The dog sneezes, which you choose to take as agreement. The chapel porch is dry beneath its little roof. A clay lamp burns there, low and nearly spent, and beside it rests a wooden bowl with a heel of coarse bread in it, for any traveller or poor soul who arrives before dawn. The bread is hard enough to endure a siege, a good sign of quality in bread, perhaps not in charity. You check the bowl anyway, untouched. So the boy has not yet come, or he has come and been wiser than to linger. From inside the guest shed you hear nothing. Brother Matin, it seems, has surrendered to sleep or prayer, and in monks the distinction is sometimes hard to prove from outside. You pass through the little wicket into the yard, moving slowly between the graves. The grass here is slick and flattened by the damp. Some stones are carved, some plain, some so worn by rain and years that whatever names they once held are long since given back to silence. At the far edge of the yard a narrow path leads to the alms porch where poor folk queue on feast mornings for broth, crusts, or whatever mercy the day can spare. Nearby hangs a little reliquary box under the eaves. Locked and sealed, holding some scrap of a saint or perhaps some scrap of a saint's cupboard. No one can quite agree which, and the priest is wise enough not to invite detailed questions. Then you hear it, a soft knock, not on the wall, as the old woman swore, but on wood, very gentle. 2 taps, a pause, then one more. The dog stops dead beside you. Its ears lift. Even the crooked one manages ambition. You listen. There it is again. Tap, tap, pause, tap. It is coming from the chapel porch or just beyond it. You circle wide, keeping the lantern low. The mist slides across the ground in torn strips. Your staff feels heavier in your hand, not because of danger exactly, but because the hour makes everything feel more ceremonial. You come around the porch post and find not a ghost, not a restless soul trapped in stone, but an old wooden prayer board hung crooked by one leather thong. The wind, such as it is, nudges it against the wall. Tap, tap, pause, tap. You stand looking at it for a long moment. The dog steps forward, sniffs the board, and sneezes again in deep professional disappointment. So the wall is innocent, you whisper. Yet as soon as the thought comes, another sound follows it. Not a knock this time. A whispering scrape from farther off. Near the yew, you turn. The mist under the tree is thicker, gathered among the roots and stones. The branches spread wide and black overhead, holding the dark differently from the rest of the yard, as if they have been practicing. For a heartbeat you see nothing. Then the scrape comes again, cloth against bark, perhaps, or shoe against root. Some swear yews planted by chapels are older than memory and know more names than the priest. Some say they keep the boundary between the living and the dead not by force but by familiarity, as an old porter keeps a door by never quite forgetting anyone who has used it. Others say yews are only trees, and gloomy ones at that. At this hour, neither argument feels entirely satisfying. You take 2 careful steps closer. Who is there, you ask softly? The answer is immediate, though not dramatic. A figure rises from the far side of the trunk with a startled gasp, untangling itself from shadow and low branches. It is not a spirit. It is a woman in a sodden cloak, perhaps 30, perhaps older by hardship, with a basket on her arm and a face pinched by cold and embarrassment. She clutches a little bundle of herbs to her breast, as if you may confiscate time on behalf of the crown. "I was only praying," she says. This is perhaps true and perhaps not the whole of it. People do many things in chapel yards before dawn and call nearly all of them prayer. At this hour you ask, "My little girl has the fever again." Her voice cracks not with drama but with fatigue. That, more than anything, convinces you. She lifts the herb bundle slightly. Mira said to hang yarrow and rue by the bed, and old Annis swore the ewe hears mothers best before dawn. There it is. Folk cure, chapel custom, and desperation tied together in one wet knot. You are tying herbs to the tree, you ask. She nods, ashamed now that the act is visible. You glance at the trunk. Sure enough, a little thread has been looped around a low branch, and from it hangs a twist of rue and yarrow bound with red wool. You almost tell her it will do nothing. Then again, perhaps it will do one thing. Give a frightened mother something to hold in her thoughts while the child burns and sleeps. Medieval medicine is rarely one thing alone. It is herbs, prayers, steam, luck, honey, saints, willow bark, and waiting to see what morning decides. "She should have willow bark as well," comes a voice from the porch. Brother Matin stands there wrapped in his robe, hair flattened on one side from sleep, his waxed cloth bundle tucked under one arm as if even dreams have not persuaded him to trust the world with books. He looks less holy than crumpled, which somehow makes him more useful. The woman stares at him. "Willow bark for the heat," he says, coming forward, and cloths dipped in cool water at the wrists and neck. If she can drink, thin ale or broth. Not much at once. Slowly. The woman nods too quickly, committing every word to fear. "I have comfrey and sage," Matin says, "but not enough willow for all the town's children, praise God." Still he kneels, opens the satchel, and draws out a little wrapped packet. "Take this. Strip only a little at a time." She receives it as if it were silver. No one can quite agree whether fever leaves because of bark, prayer, or stubbornness, Matin adds, so I recommend all three. The woman gives a strange wet laugh, half sob, half gratitude. "Bless you. And the tree," he says mildly. At that, even you smile. She hurries off through the wicket, basket clutched close, leaving only the tied herbs swaying faintly from the branch. The dog watches her go, then looks up at the yew and decides, wisely, that trees are beyond canine jurisdiction. Brother Matin draws his robe tighter, a lively yard. It mostly knocks and confuses women. A common talent among sacred places. He stands beside you for a moment beneath the porch. The lamp burns lower. The mist thins. Beyond the yard wall, somewhere in town, a cock crows far too early and is answered by another who is equally misinformed. "You've not slept enough." You tell the monk. Neither have you. That is less impressive in my case. He inclines his head, then looks toward the arms porch. The boy may come soon. Hunger is punctual when pride finally tires. I told him first bell, then let us hope he trusts a guard with a dog. You glance down. The dog has curled itself by the porch step, already half asleep, mud on its paws and rain drying in coarse ridges through the fur. It has attached itself to the night as if it had always belonged there. The chapel bell does not ring yet. but the darkness has changed all the same. It is no longer the deep middle watch, it is the hour before dawn, when prayers, fevers, and poor decisions all seem to wait together in the same cold breath. You stand there a little longer with the monk, the yew, the tied herbs, and the nearly spent lamp, and you feel the town balancing between superstition and care, between folk remedy and faith, between fear of the dark and the slow patient work of enduring it. Then you take up your staff once more, because whatever legends gather under chapel trees, the round still goes on. You leave the chapel yard with the mist beginning to lift in thin pale ribbons from the grass, and the whole town seems to be holding itself in that strange hour before morning properly admits what it is doing. The dark has not gone, not truly, but it has loosened. The sky above the eastern wall is no longer black. It is the colour of wet slate now, and somewhere behind it dawn is rubbing its eyes like an overworked servant summoned too early. The dog comes along at your heel, yawning so extravagantly that it nearly forgets to keep walking. Brother Matin remains by the porch for the moment, wrapped in his robe, waiting perhaps for the boy, perhaps for first bell, perhaps simply because some people who spend their lives with books also enjoy standing where they can pretend the world makes a little sense before everyone else wakes up and disproves it. You leave him there in the dimness and turn toward the lower lanes where the first trades of the day begin before sensible people have finished dreaming. The earliest sign is not sound but smell. Warmth reaches you first, sliding through the damp cold in narrow golden promises. Flour, yeast, hot ash, then the sweeter, deeper scent of bread crust beginning to take in the heat. It travels through the lane with astonishing confidence, as if to say that while the town may still be dark, breakfast has already formed a plan. No perfume in a noble chamber could be more persuasive. It is enough to make even a night guard feel theological. The baker's quarter lies half awake when you reach it. A side door stands open to let out steam, and from within comes the soft repeated thump of dough hitting a board, then the scrape of a peel, then a woman's voice telling someone to mind the fire or lose eyebrows. Very medieval, that. Every century has its methods, but the oven remains a place where authority is mostly expressed through urgency. You pause at the doorway. Inside, the glow from the brick oven paints the room in shades of amber and soot. Two women work at the central table with sleeves rolled and veils tied back, forearms dusted white to the elbow. One kneads a dark rye dough with the grave rhythm of an abbess copying scripture. The other shapes smaller loaves and lays them in rows on a board already floured into a blizzard. A boy barely older than the one from the storeyard feeds billets of wood into the side firebox with the expression of someone who has been awake since the invention of fatigue. The older woman notices you and snorts softly. If you've come to arrest the smell, you'll have to queue. I'm here only in an official capacity, you say. Then officially stand where you don't drip on the flour. You oblige, which earns you the smallest corner of a smile. Bakers are rarely sentimental before dawn. Their mercy tends to come in edible forms. The dog sits at once, nose lifted, eyes wide with reverence. "Aha," says the younger woman, glancing down. "You've acquired a partner. It appears so. It has chosen well," says the older woman. "Nightmen tend to drop crusts. This is, unfortunately, true." You warm your hands near the oven mouth while they work. The heat is astonishing after hours of wet stone and drifting mist. It does not merely warm the skin. It seems to reach inward, finding all the parts of you that had quietly accepted misery as permanent and persuading them to reconsider. The room smells of rye, barley meal, singed flour, yeast, wet cloaks drying by the wall, and the faint spice of caraway from one batch meant for a wealthier table. A stack of trenchers cools on a shelf, and beside them rests a bowl of yesterday's crumbs set aside for thickening pottage or feeding birds or, more realistically, whatever desperate mouth comes first. The older woman jerks her chin toward the bowl. Take some for that beast before he starts confessing his sins. The dog, hearing nothing but tone and hope, wags once. You crouch and offer a small handful. The dog takes the crumbs delicately, then licks your glove as though gratitude should be kept modest at this hour. Good manners, says the younger woman, better than most men at market. From outside comes the sound of another door opening, then the hollow rattle of a cartwheel over wet stones. The town is beginning its slow return. A cooper somewhere knocks iron hoops back into place with sleepy precision. A woman draws water from a well, chain clinking in the lane. From farther off comes the faint cry of someone driving geese who do not yet accept the idea of mourning. Life is resuming by handfuls. The baker's boy slides the first loaves into the oven. He works with practiced speed, though his hair stands up at the back as if sleep has only retreated a few inches and means to reclaim him later. You watch the peel vanish into the heat, then emerge empty. Long night, asks the older woman. Long enough. That means trouble or weather. A little of both. She nods as if the categories have covered most human history. You tell them nothing specific. Night guard work is full of details people do not need before breakfast. Yet you stand there and absorb the ordinary miracle of this place, the flour sacks, the kneading arms, the low fire roar, the blunt competence of women who keep a town fed whether kings behave themselves or not. There is comfort in labour done without ceremony. No bells mark the baker's devotions, yet here they are, performed daily with hotter hands. On a peg near the oven hangs a small sprig of dried rosemary tied with blue thread. Your eyes linger on it. The younger woman notices. For luck, she says, and because my aunt swore bread rises kinder when the herb can see it, does it? She shrugs. No one can quite agree whether it helps the dough or only the baker. We keep it anyway. Of course they do. This town is stitched together by such habits. Red thread at the palisade, rue by a fever bed, garlic above a shutter, rosemary over the oven, saints in niches, beeswax in chapels, charms where locks and prayer meet. A night guard walking among them all like a tired needle. The first loaves come out at last, their crust dark and singing faintly as they cool. That sound alone could make a person weep if sufficiently cold. The older woman cracks one open to test the bake. Steam rising thick and fragrant into the room. She eyes you. Then the dog. Take that heel. Not the good part. I would not dare. You would if I turned my back. She is not wrong. You accept the crust she cuts away, too hot to hold for more than a second, and break a smaller piece for the dog. The beast receives it with solemn bliss and immediately forgets every sorrow it has ever known. You chew the rest slowly, and for a few blessed moments the whole world narrows to warmth, bread, and not being rained on. Outside, another sound joins the town's waking, a door being unbarred, then another, then the short, impatient ring of a smith testing metal against metal. Not full labour yet, merely the town clearing its throat. You step back into the lane and continue your round toward the riverside. There, under a lean-to by the quay. 2 fishwives are already setting baskets in order, their hands red from cold, their aprons damp from meltwater. One tips a pail and sends a stream of river water across the boards to wash yesterday's scales aside. This smell is bracing enough to undo some of the oven's comfort, but not all. Nearby, a lad is stacking kindling at the smokehouse door, and a man with a bent back checks the knots on a net, squinting as though suspicion alone may mend it. You're up early, one fishwife calls. I never went down. You answer, a foolish habit. I begin to suspect it. She laughs into her scarf. The quay itself is all grey boards, wet rope, and low river mist. Mooring posts shine black with rain. A boat nudges softly at its tether. The water carries a pale skin of morning now, though the far bank is still lost in haze. Above it all, gulls begin their first rude complaints of the day. Even in a medieval town, some creatures wake with the soul of tax collectors. From the chapel direction comes the first bell at last. It rolls through the streets with less solemnity than midnight and more promise. First bell, time for ovens, prayers, carts, and, if he has listened, a hungry boy at a porch. You picture Brother Matt in there with his herb packets and serious eyes. Perhaps the boy will come. Perhaps pride will argue a little longer. Dawn rarely solves everything. It only reveals what must be dealt with in better light. You turn back from the quay and pass the lower market lane just as two merchants' apprentices begin removing covers from the stalls. They move stiffly, yawning into their sleeves, and one nearly drops a weighing stone before he has even fully woken. The square smells different now, less like abandoned trade, more like possibility. Wet straw, yes, horse dung certainly, but also fresh bread carried on the air, apples being lifted from bins, and the raw green bite of cabbages unloaded from a handcart. The dog trots with more confidence now, as though it has decided that dawn belongs partly to it. Its tail has even begun, on rare occasion, to remember joy. And you, after a night of keys and walls and rumours and rain, begin to feel the first gentle strangeness of surviving till morning. Not triumph exactly, more a quiet loosening in the chest. The town is waking, fires are being fed, dough is rising, nets are checked, baskets are set out. Whatever the night held hunger, prayer, wet monks, foolish theft, tide herbs, chapel knocks it is passing now into the ordinary business of day. You walk on through the grey thinning dark, carrying that thought like the last warmth from the oven in your hands. You carry the warmth of the baker's oven with you a little farther than you expect, as though the crust and steam have lodged somewhere beneath your ribs and are refusing, for once, to be bullied aside by the dawn chill. It does not last forever, of course. Medieval comfort seldom does. Still, as you turn from the lower lanes toward the wall stair, the morning feels less like an enemy and more like a stern acquaintance who has finally decided to show its face. The sky above the eastern side of town has gone from slate to a pale iron grey, and along the horizon there is the faintest strip of colour. Not gold yet, not even pink, but the sort of watered silver that promises light if one is willing to wait through a little more cold. Roofs gleam damply, chimneys begin again in earnest, sending up low ribbons of smoke that lie flat in the morning air before drifting toward the river, somewhere behind you, in a yard hidden by timber walls. A cock crows with the confidence of a herald and the accuracy of a drunk bell ringer. It is answered by another, then another, until the whole town seems to be debating sunrise in poultry. You find the stair to the wall walk slick with rain and worn at the centre by many boots. The dog bounds up the first 3 steps, then thinks better of the whole enterprise and proceeds with considerably more dignity. You follow, staff tucked under one arm, hand on the damp rail. At the top the wind meets you at once, cleaner than the lane air, with river chill still in it. It tastes of wet stone, smoke, frost, and far fields. The wall walk stretches ahead in a long narrow ribbon, planks dark with moisture, parapet beaded with rain. From here the town is no longer only lanes and threshold and low conversations behind shutters. It becomes a whole arrangement again. Roofs layered one behind another. The market square opening pale at the centre. The chapel bell cote lifting above the mist. The gatehouse crouched at the edge of the wall like some patient working beast. Beyond all that, out past the ditches and fields, the land unfolds in dim winter colours, black hedgerows, silvered furrows, meadows sinking under low mist, and the river moving broad and pale as beaten pewter. You stop a moment simply to look. This is why men climb walls at dawn. You think, not for glory, not even for vigilance, though that is the official answer. They climb because the town makes a different kind of sense from above. Down below, the night has been all fragments, one door, one bell, one story, one wet dog, one frightened boy, one herb bundle beneath a yew. Up here, all of it belongs to the same place. The same sleeping cluster of hearths and sheds and lanes and storehouses. All of it held together by wood smoke and custom, and the stubborn refusal of ordinary people to stop beginning again each morning. The dog sits beside your boot and squints into the wind as though evaluating the entire county. To be fair, you murmur, you do look supervisory. Far out along the North Road, where it curves between bare hedges and a little stand of alder, you see movement a cart, slow and small in the distance, its wheels leaving dark lines through the wet track. Another shape follows on foot, perhaps a drover, perhaps a pilgrim, perhaps just a man late to somewhere no more pleasant than this. Closer in, near the riverside meadow, two figures are already crossing the field with bundles over their shoulders, heading toward the town before the morning trade fully wakes. From the Abbey Road a faint bell sound drifts in, thinner than the town bells, as if the countryside itself is beginning its prayers. No one can quite agree whether dawn always feels hopeful because of the light, or because people are too tired by then to continue being afraid in the same way. Looking out now, you understand both arguments. You walk the parapet slowly, glancing over the outer side where the ditch lies dark and narrow below, then back across the roofs within. Watchfires farther down the wall have burned low to red cores, their smoke rising almost straight now in the still air. One of the guards at the north angle lifts a hand in greeting. You return it. No need for the full call of all well now. The morning itself is beginning to answer. From above, you can see the first proper signs of the day taking hold. A stable door opens and a man leads out a horse whose breath makes clouds in the chill. A washerwoman empties a pail into the gutter and immediately regrets the splash against her hem. Two apprentices cross the market square carrying folded cloth, moving with the slow, earnest misery unique to young men, awakened before they have finished growing. At the baker's lane, steam pours again from the side vent, and someone props the outer shutter wide enough for the smell of fresh bread to claim half the district. Near the quay, a cluster of gulls descends with the shameless optimism of creatures convinced every human labour exists chiefly to produce scraps. You reach the corner tower and lean lightly against the parapet. The stone is cold enough to bite through the glove. Below, the gate road runs outward into the wet world, and on its near side the ditch and palisade line look almost peaceful in the grey light, which is deeply unfair to how they felt in darkness. The little charm you noticed earlier, red thread, dried herb, iron nail still flutters from one stake, bright and stubborn against the washed-out morning. Some swear that charms work best at the edges of things' thresholds, crossroads, gates, cribsides, churchyards, and town walls, places where one state becomes another, night to day, outside to inside, illness to health, if fortune is kind. Looking at that scrap of thread now, you think perhaps the charm's truest power is not in keeping evil out, but in reminding the watcher that someone cared enough to tie it there. Below, from the chapel quarter, first bell has given way to more purposeful sound. You cannot hear voices clearly from this height, but you can make out movement near the porch, a small figure, another beside it, Brother Matin, perhaps, and the boy from the storeyard at last. You cannot be sure. The distance reduces everyone to shapes and intentions, yet that, too, feels right. Not every act of mercy requires witness close enough to take credit. The dog rises suddenly and gives one low bark toward the eastern fields. You follow its gaze. There, over the far hedges. The light is changing properly now. The grey begins to thin, and along the wet edges of the ploughed strips a faint brightness gathers, enough to pick out the frost still clinging in the furrows. River mist drifts low across the meadows in long white bands. A flock of small birds lifts from the reeds all at once, turning briefly dark against the morning before vanishing into it. Behind you, within the town, a door bangs open and someone shouts for an apprentice who's apparently moving too slowly for bread-related standards. Somewhere else a child starts crying. Somewhere else a pot lid falls with a clatter that sounds, from up here, strangely cheerful. Life is resuming in full now, dragging along all its little frictions and routines. You continue along the wall, one measured step after another, and the whole night begins to settle differently in your thoughts. The monk at the postern, the old woman's warning, the prayer board tapping in the mist, the mother tying herbs to the yew, Tib and his onion by the brazier, the boy with oats in a sack light enough to shame the word theft, the dog under the lantern. None of it feels dramatic from up here, only human, which may be the same thing, once enough time has passed. At the far end of the walk the wind cuts sharper, coming unhindered off the fields. You pull your cloak tighter and look one last time beyond the walls. A monastery tower shows itself faintly through the lifting haze upriver. A broken cart stands by the north road exactly where some drover had likely cursed it in the dark. Smoke rises from scattered crofts like lines drawn by an uncertain hand. The land beyond the town is not empty at all. It is simply farther apart in its troubles. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether a wall separates safety from danger or merely offers a better place to notice both. This morning, with damp planks beneath your boots and a wet dog at your side, you suspect the second answer is truer. The light grows, stone edges sharpen, roof tiles begin to show their proper colours beneath the damp. The market cross catches the first pale gleam and stands out against the square. The town is remembering itself now, and you, high above it for a little while longer. Feel your long night easing into something quieter than pride and steadier than relief. Not finished yet, but nearing its end. You come down from the wall walk with the morning wind still in your cloak, and the pale light of dawn following you into the narrower streets, where everything that belonged to the night now looks smaller, plainer, and somehow more forgivable. The stairs are slick beneath your boots, the parapet damp against your sleeve as you turn past it, and by the time you step again onto the lane stones, the town is properly waking. Not all at once. Never all at once. A medieval town rises in layers, like a loaf that has taken its time. First the ovens, then the bells, then the shutters, then the voices, then, at last, the arguments. The dog lands beside you at the foot of the stairs with the expression of one who has personally supervised the dawn and found it mostly acceptable. Well done, you murmur. We have successfully prevented the sky from falling. The dog sneezes, which may be modesty. Your round now bends back toward the gatehouse, because every night watch, no matter how full of rumours, rain, and onion-based fellowship, must eventually become a report. There is something almost disappointing about that. The long drifting business of listening, checking, walking, and wondering must at last turn into fact simple enough for another sleepy man to understand before breakfast. The streets on the way back feel changed, where darkness concealed, morning reveals. There is the cooper's apprentice dragging out a hoop rack with all the grace of a condemned prince. There is a woman in a fur-lined cloak setting a pail beneath a drip and muttering at the roof as if the conversation has gone on for years. There are the shutters of the draper's shop opening one by one, and behind them bolts of cloth being lifted from hooks, colours still muted in the dimness but promising richer life once the sun rises higher. A pig noses at a pile of wilted cabbage leaves near the market square, and is shooed away by a stall boy with a broom and no sense of humour. The smell of the town has changed again too. Night's damp smoke and stale ale are giving way to warm bread, fresh dung, wet straw newly disturbed, wood ash, and the first hopeful ladles of pottage being stirred in kitchens. Somewhere someone is frying onions in fat. Somewhere someone else is regretting onions from the night before. Civilization, in other words, continues. As you cross the edge of the market square, you glance toward the chapel lane. There, in the clearer light, you do see two figures near the porch after all. One is Brother Matin, unmistakable even at a distance because no one else stands with such scholarly misery and such poor footwear. The other is the boy from the storeyard, shoulders still narrow beneath his patched tunic, but no longer trying to vanish into a wall. An older woman is with him too now, wrapped in a shawl, one hand pressed to her chest while Matin speaks to her with the grave care of a man explaining herb doses to people who would much rather hear a miracle. Good. You do not go over. Some kindnesses are better left without witnesses collecting extra meaning from them. It is enough to see the boy has come. The dog, however, notices the scene and pauses, tail giving one thoughtful swish, as if considering whether to claim responsibility. You tug lightly at your cloak hem instead. No, let the monks have one victory. At the gatehouse the day watch is already gathering like crows around a promising field. Two men stand by the arch yawning into their fists. Another adjusts the strap of his quilted jack and stamps warmth into his boots. A fourth is hauling the larger gate leaf open a little wider to admit the first carts that will soon begin queuing outside. The chains groan overhead, the lanterns, which looked so important in the dark, now appear smoky and tired, their authority dissolving in the plain insistence of mourning. Inside the passage, Hamo stands beside the tally board with a bit of chalk in one hand and a face that suggests dawn is a technical requirement rather than a joy. He looks up as you approach. His eyes go first to you, then the dog, then back to you. You've brought administration, he says. It brought itself. The dog sits beside your boot as if appearing in reports is routine. Hamo sniffs once, perhaps at the dog, perhaps at the rain-dried wool and old smoke on your cloak. Well, this is the moment. Then you unhook the keys from your belt and place them in his hand one by one. Postern, lantern chest, storeyard wicket. They leave your palm colder than when they arrived, their weight gone all at once. It feels strange, almost disappointing, like setting down part of the night itself. Postern opened once after curfew, you say. A monk arrived, Brother Matin, from St. Bride's cell above the marsh road, muddy, tired, carrying books and herb packets. You inspected him. Hamo grunts. I remember my own monk. Storeyard latch was found loosened. A boy had got in after oats and onions. At this Hamo's eyes sharpen. Whose boy didn't say. Thin, patched sleeves, different boots. Hungry rather than clever. That describes half the town and most of the council. You continue, because the Reeves' humour is not permission to wander. I sent him to the chapel porch at first bell, told him to report there and come mend the latch if required. Hamo considers that. His fingers close around the keys. You let him go. I did. Did he take much? Not enough to dignify the effort. A longer pause this time. Outside. A cart rattles onto the road beyond the gate. One of the day guards coughs. Chalk dust sits white along the side of Hamo's thumb. At times, he says at last. The trouble with starving boys is they grow into starving men if nobody interrupts the process. You're not entirely certain whether this is approval, but it is close enough to live on. There was also chapel yard noise, as you say, a loose prayer board knocking in the wind, and a woman tying herbs to the yew for a fevered child. Ah, Hamo nods as if this is comfortably ordinary. Every town has a tree people overburdened with theology. He reaches for the chalkboard and makes a little mark you do not understand. Perhaps it means monk admitted, latch to inspect, world still imperfect. Medieval administration is not always transparent. Anything else? You think of Tib in the gatehouse shelter, of bread and onion, of rain on the roof. You think of the market square at midnight, the old woman in the alehouse, the fox beyond the ditch, the prayer tied to the yew, the charm on the palisade, the dog following you through it all like a damp footnote determined to become a chapter. A quiet night, you say. Hamo looks at the dog again. I admire your standards. He turns then and passes the keys to the pegboard, each one hanging in its proper place with a deep iron click. The sound lands in you more heavily than expected. The watch is ending, not by fanfare, not by praise, simply by a key returned, a latch mentioned, a night accounted for. One of the daymen takes your staff and leans it to the others. Another moves past you smelling strongly of onions and sheep grease. Through the arch you can see morning fully at work now. 2 carts waiting at the gate. A pilgrim woman with a shell badge adjusting her bundle. A butcher's boy chasing his own cap across the mud while his master shouts discouragements from behind. Above the rooftops the bells begin again. Not solemn this time, but practical, telling the town what hour it has reached and thereby ensuring everyone can disagree with authority on schedule. Hamo closes the tally board and squints at the dog. That thing yours? Certainly not. The dog wags once without shame. Hamo stoops, breaks off a piece from an old crust lying by the brazier, and tosses it. The dog catches it with indecent grace. Then it belongs to the office now. There are worse institutions. There are richer ones. You nearly smile. Outside, the first proper rush of day begins. A grain cart rolls under the arch. A fishwife calls to the gate men that if they dawdle much longer, her eels will outlive them all. Someone farther off is already arguing over market tolls. The square will soon fill. The stores will open. The bells will divide the hours into pieces manageable enough for human beings to misunderstand. And through it all, most people will never know exactly how the town passed from dark into daylight. They will only know that it did. This, you begin to understand, is the odd pride of the watch, not glory, not gratitude, simply the knowledge that doors held. Fires did not rise. The hungry were not wholly abandoned. The frightened were not entirely alone. And morning found the streets still where evening left them. Hamo jerks his head toward the inner bench. Go on, then, before I mistake you for useful. You do not argue. Your feet have become historical artifacts. Your shoulders ache from cloak, rein, staff, and key weight now gone. Yet beneath the weariness there is something steadier, quieter, not triumph, not even satisfaction. More the feeling of having carried a fragile thing through the dark without dropping it. You step away from the arch while the day watch takes your place, and the dog, after the briefest hesitation, comes with you. Of course it does. You leave the gatehouse at last with no staff in your hand and no keys dragging at your belt, and the absence of those weights feels almost stranger than carrying them did. For hours the night has measured itself through iron, wood, flame, and footstep. Now, suddenly, morning asks nothing of you but that you stop. It is a difficult instruction. A body used to listening for trouble does not fall at once into rest. It still hears too much. The clink of harness at the gate, the creak of a cart axle, a woman calling for fresh water, the bells, practical and unromantic now, sorting the town into tasks. The dog trots beside you across the inner lane as if it has always belonged there, as if it has spent every dawn in the company of tired officials and never once considered a different career. In the fuller light you can see it properly for the first time, brown indeed, though patched with darker streaks along the back, white at the chest, one ear obedient, one forever unconvinced, a thin old scar along the muzzle, mud dried in little ridges on the paws, not handsome in any grand sense, merely durable, a very medieval face. Well, you murmur, we've both survived the management of darkness. The dog pants once in quiet agreement. The chamber set aside for off-duty watchmen lies above a side passage near the inner wall, reached by a stair so narrow that even fatigue must climb it sideways. You know the place only from Hamo's earlier mention, and from the smell leaking faintly down the steps: straw, old smoke, wool blankets, damp leather, and the stale human warmth of men who sleep in brief surrendered heaps before being summoned back to usefulness. It is not a noble lodging, no carved bedstead, no painted chest, no feather mattress, just a room under the rafters with pallets laid along the wall, a little shuttered window, and a brazier that has ambitions greater than its fuel. By the time you reach the top, your knees feel as though they belong to an elderly saint whose miracles were all orthopedic. The room itself is dim and low-beamed. Morning light presses weakly through the horn pane in the window, enough to show floating dust, the edge of a folded blanket, a pair of boots abandoned beside a pallet, and the hollowed centre of straw mattresses that have learned the shape of tired men. One pallet near the far wall is unclaimed. A coarse wool blanket lies across it, and beside it rests a stool with a clay cup, an iron nail hammered into the beam above for hanging a cloak, and, unexpectedly, a bunch of dried lavender tied with string. Someone's attempt to persuade the room into gentleness. It does not fully succeed, but the effort matters. You hang your cloak on the nail. Water still drips from the hem. Your boots come off with the long, reluctant sigh of leather that has endured too much weather and too many stones. You sit on the edge of the pallet first, because lying down immediately might tempt the body to think it has died. The dog circles twice on the rushes, then chooses the place beside the pallet where your cloak drips least, and folds itself there with a grunt so small it is nearly a prayer. Through the horn pane you can see only a piece of sky and the top of a chimney beyond the wall. Smoke drifts across it in a pale ribbon. Bells ring again, farther away now, softened by height and morning. A cart rattles somewhere below. Voices rise and fall in the lane. The town is fully entering the day, and you are stepping out of it, which feels almost unnatural, as though you have slipped behind a tapestry, and discovered the world continues weaving without consulting you. For a little while you simply sit. The night returns in pieces while your hands begin to thaw. The gate arch in blue dusk, Hamo and the keys, the fish lane, the old woman by the hearth speaking of knocking walls, frost on the palisade stakes, Brother Matin outside the postern with books under his arm and rain on his lashes, midnight over the square with the market cross pale under the moon, Tib's onion and bread under the gatehouse roof while the rain tapped on the timber, the dog under the awning, the boy in the storeyard with oats in a sack too light to call stealing without sounding absurd, the yew tree in the chapel yard, the mother tying herbs before dawn, the baker's oven, the wall walk in first light. Each memory seems smaller now that it is over, and at the same time dearer. That is one of morning's tricks. It reduces danger and enlarges detail. You rub your hands together and notice at last the soot under your nails, the grain dust at one cuff, the dried rain marks on your sleeves. Your palms smell faintly of iron and dog fur. Your shoulders ache. Your feet are no longer companions but accusations. And yet, beneath all that, a calm has begun to gather, slow and unshowy. No one can quite agree whether weariness makes a person humble or simply too tired to pretend otherwise. Sitting here in the dim rafters, you suspect the difference matters less than priest would claim. A knock sounds at the half-open door. You turn, expecting Hamo, perhaps, or Tib with some new municipal absurdity. Instead it is Brother Matin, looking no less crumpled than before, though the morning has improved him slightly by drying his hem. In one hand he holds a little wooden bowl. In the other, your dignity's final test, a heel of fresh bread and a scrap of soft cheese wrapped in cloth. The baker's wife declared that any guard who delivers hungry boys to chapel porches without adding false heroics to the story may have this, he says. You stare at the food as if it might vanish from overexposure to gratitude. The boy came. Then. He came, says Matin, with his mother, very thin, very proud. Hamo has already found him a morning's work mending the wicket and clearing rushes from the lane. Payment in bread first, then coin, if he proves less troublesome than his spoon suggested. You exhale. The room seems to settle another inch around you. Matin steps inside and offers the bowl. It contains thin pottage, still warm, barley, onion, maybe a little leek, and some herb you cannot immediately name. To a lord it would be an insult. To you, after the long night, it smells like doctrinal truth. Also, the monk adds, glancing at the dog, the mother insisted that beast receive this crust in thanks for looking severe. The dog lifts its head instantly, as if severity has always been its chief spiritual gift. You take the bowl. You've been very busy for a man in appalling sandals. It is important to maintain range. He smiles then, only slightly, and leans one shoulder against the beam. The child's fever may break, or may not. The willow will help if the Lord, the body, and the circumstances decide not to quarrel too hard. He says it plainly. No false certainty, no pious embroidery. It is a kind of kindness in itself. You nod. Sleep, he says after a moment. Morning belongs to louder people. Then he leaves you with the bowl, the bread, the cheese, and the crust for the dog. You eat slowly. The pottage warms you from inside out. Gentler than ale, steadier than fire. The bread is still soft in the middle, with flour dust clinging to the crust. The cheese tastes faintly of the cellar and a cow that was probably difficult in spring. You share the offered crust with the dog, who accepts it with grave concentration and then settles again, chin on paws, as if now officially attached to your shift whether or not the guilds approve. Below the window, the town swells into full day. Wheels, calls, hooves, a hammer beginning somewhere, market voices gathering in the square. If you listen closely, you can distinguish layers of labour the way you distinguish layers of silence at night. Morning is only another kind of watch, busier and less honest about its fears. At last you set down the empty bowl and lie back on the pallet. The straw gives with a dry whisper beneath you. The blanket smells of lanolin, dust, and old winter. Above, the rafters are soot black and crossed with tiny shafts of light where the roof does not entirely trust itself. The lavender tied to the beam breathes faintly whenever the draught shifts. Your eyes begin to close before you have fully decided whether this is wise. And now the pace of the world softens. The sounds from the town below no longer arrive as duties. They become distance, a bell, rounded by air. Cartwheels turn gentle by the plank floor beneath you. Voices without faces, a dog sighing beside the pallet. Somewhere a pigeon shifting in the eaves. Somewhere farther still the river moving under the morning mist, carrying bits of light along its surface as quietly as a hand passing over cloth. You let the memory of the wall return one final time, the grey light lifting over the fields, the frost in the furrows, the smoke rising straight from the crofts beyond town, the little charm tied to the palisade stake, red thread bright against washed wood. You think of the chapel yew standing patient over prayers it may or may not hear, of Tibb's sackcloth on the cold bench, of the old woman in the alehouse warning you about knocks in the wall, of Hamo hanging the keys back on their pegs, of Brother Matin with his books and herb packets moving through dawn like a tired crow carrying useful wisdom, of the baker's oven, the smell of warm bread reaching into the dark before the sun did. The whole town seems to gather now, not as streets or tasks or watch points, but as warmth behind walls, a little hearth, a shutter bar, a loaf on a board, a bucket by a well, a cloak drying, a child sleeping cooler than before, a mother untying her herb thread with slow, careful fingers, the poor boy with his spoon perhaps chewing bread at last without stealing it, the market cross in the growing light, the gate open, the bells still measuring the hours for everyone, whether they listen kindly or not. You breathe in. The room smells of straw and smoke and wool and the soft faded purple of lavender. You breathe out. The night loosens entirely. What was cold becomes merely remembered. What was fearful becomes distant. What was lonely becomes part of a long, quiet chain of ordinary souls who have also kept watch, walked walls, listened at doors, warmed hands over weak braziers, trusted bread, trusted bells, trusted daylight to come back though they could not hurry it. Outside, the medieval town goes on with all its creaking carts and muttered prayers and wet stones and soot-black beams and stubborn little mercies. Inside, under the rafters, with the dog curled near your boots and the last of the morning dimmed by your closing eyes, the world grows smaller, warmer and stiller. The bells fade, the smoke thins, the light at the horn pane softens to a pale blur, and at last you let the town keep itself for a while sleep comes over you not as a fall, but as a blanket drawn slowly, kindly, and without fuss across tired shoulders.